What if everything you thought you knew about our planet was completely wrong? What if the world beneath your feet once trembled under mountains of ice so massive they could crush entire cities? What if creatures larger than buses roamed frozen wastelands where your hometown now stands? Tonight we're diving into Earth's most incredible transformation. You're about to discover the Ice Age, but forget everything Hollywood taught you. This wasn't some quick freeze that happened overnight. We're talking about millions of years of Earth playing the ultimate game of freeze tag with itself. A time when our planet became an alien world, where survival meant adapting or vanishing forever. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're sitting on ground that was once buried under ice sheets thicker than skyscrapers are tall. The very air you breathe contains molecules that once swirled through atmospheres so different they might as well have belonged to another planet entirely. But here's what will blow your mind. The Ice Age wasn't just one massive deep freeze. Think of it like Earth's heartbeat, but instead of beating once per second, it pulsed once every few thousand years. Cold periods called glacials would grip the planet, then release their hold during warmer stretches known as interglacials. This cosmic dance happened because our planet wobbles through space like a spinning coin about to fall, and these tiny changes in Earth's position determined whether entire continents lived or died under ice. During the coldest chapters of this epic story, something magical happened. Ocean levels plummeted as unimaginable amounts of water transformed into towering walls of ice. Continents grew larger, hidden land bridges emerged from the depths, creating highways between worlds that had been separated for millions of years. Asia reached out and touched North America across what we now call the Bering Strait, forming a frozen superhighway called Beringia. But the real magic wasn't in the ice itself, it was in the life that refused to surrender. While northern regions became frozen kingdoms, the southern parts of our planet remained warm enough to support incredible ecosystems. Woolly mammoths with tusks like curved sabers wandered across endless grasslands. Giant ground sloths the size of small cars ambled through ancient forests. Saber-toothed cats prowled with fangs longer than kitchen knives, their muscles rippling under thick fur designed for a world we can barely comprehend. These weren't just random creatures struggling to survive, they were perfectly engineered for their frozen world. Mammoths developed wool coats so effective that their preserved bodies still contain intact hair after being frozen for thousands of years. Cave bears grew to enormous sizes, their bulk helping them survive harsh winters in underground shelters. Even plants adapted, creating vast steppes, treeless grasslands that stretched from Europe to Alaska, feeding herds so massive they darkened the horizon. And somewhere in this frozen wilderness, our ancestors were writing the first chapters of human ingenuity. They weren't just surviving Mings, they were thriving. These early humans developed technologies that wouldn't be improved upon for thousands of years. They crafted spear tips from stone with edges sharper than modern surgical instruments. They learned to control fire so completely that they could carry it across continents without letting it die. They created art on cave walls that still moves us today, capturing the essence of their world in paintings that survived longer than most civilizations. What's absolutely mind-bending is how these climate cycles shaped not just the landscape, but the very evolution of life itself. Every advance and retreat of the ice created new evolutionary pressures. Animals that could adapt survived and spread. Those that couldn't became memories preserved in fossil beds. Humans themselves were forged in this crucible of ice and fire, developing larger brains, better tools, and more sophisticated social structures. With each challenge the planet threw at them, scientists have unlocked these secrets by drilling deep into ancient ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland. Each layer of ice is like a page in Earth's diary, containing tiny bubbles of atmosphere from thousands of years ago. By analyzing these frozen time capsules, researchers can literally breathe the same air that mammoths breathed, understanding exactly what our planet's climate was doing, decade by decade, century by century. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. Those gentle rolling hills in your local park, probably sculpted by glaciers grinding rock into powder, that lake you drive past on your way to work, likely carved out by ice sheets moving with the slow, unstoppable force of geological time. Even the soil in your garden contains minerals that traveled hundreds of miles, carried by rivers of ice that flowed like frozen conveyor belts across continents. But perhaps the most incredible part of this story is how everything connected across vast distances and enormous timescales. When ice sheets grew in the north, deserts expanded in Africa. When glaciers melted, forests bloomed in regions that had been frozen wastelands for millennia. Animals migrated across newly formed land bridges, carrying their genes and behaviors into territories they had never seen before. Humans followed these migrations, spreading across the globe and adapting to environments so diverse they might as well have been exploring different planets. The mammoth steppe marsh, as the vast grassland ecosystem that once covered huge portions of Earth, supported more large animals than Africa does today. Herds of bison, horses, mammoths, and rhinoceros moved in migrations so massive they could be heard from miles away. The thunder of hooves on frozen ground, the trumpeting calls of mammoths communicating across vast distances, the howls of wolf packs following the herd's poof, this was nature operating on a scale that modern humans have never witnessed. Yet this wasn't a static world locked in permanent winter. Every few tens of thousands of years, the cosmic tumblers would align differently, and warmth would return, ice sheets would retreat, sometimes in just centuries, completely transforming the planet's appearance. Rivers would swell with meltwater, carving new channels and flooding vast areas. Forests would advance northward, reclaiming territory from the retreating ice. The great herds would shift their migration patterns, following the changing vegetation zones as the world transformed around them. Tonight, we're going to explore this lost world together, uncovering secrets that have been locked in ice and stone for millions of years. We'll walk alongside our ancestors as they navigate a planet that challenges everything we think we know about survival, adaptation, and the incredible resilience of life itself. But paradise never lasts forever. These golden intervals of warmth would eventually surrender to an unstoppable force creeping across the landscape, like a slow-motion tsunami made of ice. The glaciers always returned, patient as death itself, grinding forward with the kind of determination that makes mountains bow in submission. And it was precisely during one of these precious warm periods that humanity discovered its potential, mastering fire, crafting weapons that could bring down giants, and creating the first artwork that would outlast empires. When humans finally emerged from this frozen crucible and stepped into what we call recorded history, they carried invisible souvenirs from their icy past. Our migration patterns still echo ancient roots carved by retreating glaciers. Our deepest myths and legends whisper of great floods and world-ending winters because our ancestors lived through them. Even our physical bodies bear the signature of this frozen epoch, our ability to store fat, our craving for warmth, our instinctive fear of being trapped in cold darkness. Understanding our modern Earth requires walking backward through this gallery of ice and time, witnessing the birth of landscapes we now take for granted, watching colossal beasts lumber across territories that would later become our neighborhoods. So let's venture deeper into this alien version of our planet, where the horizon blazes white with endless snow and ancient winds carry stories that predate civilization itself. The transformation didn't announce itself with fanfare or catastrophe. Instead, it whispered across millennia, so gradually that thousands of generations lived and died without realizing their world was fundamentally changing. The mechanism was almost absurdly simple, tiny adjustments in Earth's cosmic dance, wobbles and tilts, so microscopic they wouldn't register on any human timescale. Yet these celestial hiccups altered the angles at which sunlight kissed the northern latitudes, and slowly, inevitably, summers lost their power to completely melt winter's legacy. Before this gradual apocalypse began, the northern territories wore completely different faces. Vast forests carpeted regions that today exist only as barren tundra. Mighty rivers carved channels through landscapes now buried under permafrost. Diverse ecosystems flourished where only the hardiest lichens survive today. It was a living, breathing world full of warmth and abundance till the mathematics of orbital mechanics decided otherwise. The accumulation started innocuously enough. Snow that should have melted lingered a few extra weeks. Each passing year added another layer to deposits that refused to disappear. Decade after decade, these innocent snowpacks compressed under their own weight, transforming into something far more sinister: ice with the patience of geological time and the strength to reshape continents. Once these frozen monsters gained momentum, they became unstoppable forces of nature. The Laurentide ice sheet transformed into a frozen empire spanning most of North America, its southern borders reaching deep into territories that would one day become major cities. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet conquered Scandinavia before launching its own southern invasion, bulldozing everything in its path with crushing inevitability. Even the southern hemisphere couldn't escape this frozen conquest. Ice caps crowned the highlands of South America and New Zealand, turning these regions into frozen kingdoms that challenged every living thing to adapt or perish. The planet was becoming something fundamentally different, not just colder but stranger in ways that stretched the boundaries of what life could endure. As water became imprisoned in these massive ice fortresses, the oceans themselves began to retreat, exposing vast continental shelves that had been underwater for millions of years. These newly revealed lands created superhighways for migration, allowing species to spread between continents in ways that would reshape the genetic map of life on Earth. But the exposure of so much land also created perfect conditions for massive dust storms that could darken skies for weeks at a time. The atmosphere itself became a different entity. Winds scoured the exposed ocean floors and dried riverbeds, lifting incredible quantities of fine particles and transporting them across continents. These dust deposits, still buried beneath modern soils from China to the American Midwest, tell the story of a planet where the very air carried the weight of geological transformation. In this harsh new reality, forests couldn't maintain their ancient territories. They retreated southward like armies in full retreat, leaving behind vast steppes where hardy grasses learned to survive in conditions that would have killed their predecessors. Entire ecosystems packed up and moved, following the shifting boundaries between survival and extinction as climate zones migrated across hundreds of miles. But Earth's climate system operates like an incredibly complex orchestra, where every instrument affects every other. The orbital changes that started this transformation were just the opening notes. Volcanic eruptions added their own dark symphony, spewing ash and gases that dimmed sunlight and accelerated cooling. Ocean currents, those massive conveyor belts of heat distribution, shifted their patterns as ice sheets altered coastlines and changed the very shape of ocean basins. This created a feedback loop of cooling that fed on itself. More ice meant more sunlight reflected back to space. Lower sea levels meant different ocean circulation patterns. Changed vegetation meant different absorption of solar energy. Each cooling effect amplified the others until the planet locked itself into a completely different climatic state, one where ice ruled vast portions of the Earth's surface. Yet in this seemingly hostile world, life demonstrated its incredible resilience and adaptability. Plants evolved strategies for surviving in conditions their ancestors never faced, developing specialized root systems that could penetrate permafrost, and leaves that could photosynthesize in extremely low light conditions. These hardy pioneers colonized the edges of glaciers, creating narrow bands of life in landscapes that seemed designed to prohibit it. The animal kingdom responded with even more dramatic adaptations. Woolly mammoths and mastodons evolved into living furnaces, with fat layers thick enough to insulate them against temperatures that would kill most modern mammals. Their massive bodies were perfectly engineered for their frozen world to molter small ears to prevent heat loss, dense fur coats that trapped warm air, and curved tusks that could clear snow to reach buried vegetation. Massive herds of these Ice Age titans thundered across the mammoth steppes, creating migration spectacles that dwarfed anything the modern world has witnessed. Bison, muskoxen, and caribou formed moving rivers of life across landscapes that stretched beyond the horizon. These weren't just animals, they were ecosystem engineers, their grazing patterns and migration routes creating and maintaining the grassland environments that supported countless other species. The predators of this frozen world evolved into killing machines perfectly suited to their harsh environment. Saber-toothed cats developed weapons that could pierce the thick hides and fat layers of their massive prey. Dire wolves learned to hunt in coordinated packs that could bring down animals many times their size. Even smaller predators like Arctic foxes and snow leopards became specialists in navigating and hunting in deep snow and extreme cold. The atmosphere would stretch endlessly overhead, washed out and brittle, with a sun that barely managed to climb above the horizon before surrendering to perpetual twilight. This landscape existed in profound silence, broken only by the occasional thunderous crack of advancing ice sheets, as they continued their relentless march across the continent. Yet this marked merely the opening chapter of Earth's most extraordinary transformation. As millennia passed, the cold intensified with each passing century, glaciers swelled to unimaginable proportions, and our planet entered the most spectacular period of change in its entire existence. But don't mistake this frozen realm for a lifeless wasteland. This was a world in constant motion, sculpting continents with forces so massive they defied comprehension, reshaping oceans, and ultimately determining the destiny of every human who would eventually master the art of survival in this crystalline wilderness. The scene was now perfectly arranged, a globe encased in perpetual winter, terrain molded by powers too enormous for any single mind to grasp, but an environment where continuing to exist meant evolving in ways no living being had ever before attempted. From this Arctic theatre, the genuine saga of our planet's frozen epoch was about to unfold, progressing one methodical stride after another. During ice's absolute dominion over Earth, the sheer magnitude wasn't limited to the landscape alone. The beasts that roamed these territories were beyond anything our modern world has ever witnessed. This represented an epoch of true titans, forged by an environment simultaneously merciless and boundless, where enormous size became the ultimate strategy for staying alive. Standing among these creatures would have made even the bravest explorer feel utterly insignificant. The massive migrating herds dominated this frozen stage first and foremost. Picture a limitless expanse, bitter and scoured by endless winds, yet pulsing with incredible movement and energy. Woolly mammoths advanced in magnificent processions, their dense, shaggy pelts flowing like enormous tapestries of coarse fiber, those distinctive curved tusks slicing through frigid air as they excavated beneath snow layers searching for buried vegetation. These weren't isolated, legendary creatures existing in small numbers. They assembled in groups numbering in the dozens, occasionally reaching into the hundreds, traversing the steppes in systematic patterns while seeking sustenance. Their enormous footprints compressed deep impressions into the solid frozen earth, creating pathways that extended across vast distances and remained visible for countless seasons afterward. Sharing these territories were the mastodons, the more compact relatives of mammoths, equipped with shorter limbs and straighter ivory weapons, perfectly designed for navigating the scattered forests that managed to survive along the boundaries of glacial territories. These determined giants methodically stripped bark and demolished branches with unwavering persistence, completely clearing entire areas of vegetation before moving onward to discover the next cluster of protective trees. However, mammoths and mastodons represented merely a fraction of this incredible frozen procession. The grasslands themselves teemed with countless bison, their powerful shoulders and dense fur providing armor against the razor-sharp winds that never ceased. Muskoxen, built low and broad like living fortresses, would arrange themselves in impenetrable defensive formations whenever dangerous predators approached too closely. Reindeer, the ancestors of modern caribou, maintained constant migration patterns, their hooves creating rhythmic percussion against the hardened ground in beats as ancient as the glaciers that shaped their world. The hunters of this realm followed these herds with deadly precision. Dire wolves stalked along the perimeters of grazing animals, significantly larger and more powerful than any modern wolf, with jaws specifically evolved for crushing through the thickest bones. Saber-toothed cats, armed with their elongated curved daggers, maintained patient vigils hidden among the scattered vegetation, prepared to launch devastating attacks against prey many times their own body weight. Cave lions, leaner in build but nearly double the mass of contemporary African lions, patrolled these steppes in sophisticated hunting parties, capable of challenging even the most intimidating quarry. These weren't simply predators, they were perfectly engineered killing machines adapted for a world where only the most efficient hunters could survive. Towering above this already harsh and magnificent ecosystem were the glaciers themselves. These colossal rivers of solid ice dominated distant horizons like frozen mountain ranges. Their vertical faces displayed intricate networks of deep azure crevasses that seemed to glow with inner light. While their movement remained imperceptibly slow, their overwhelming presence commanded respect from every living creature within hundreds of miles. The atmosphere surrounding these ice giants carried a penetrating chill, capable of cutting through even the densest fur coverings. Every crack and groan of shifting ice reverberated across vast distances, creating deep, resonant sounds that served as constant reminders of the tremendous power resting just beyond immediate reach. Despite their dominance, these glaciers weren't permanently fixed features. They advanced and withdrew in geological rhythms, grinding steadily across entire continents, stripping away accumulated soil, and completely restructuring the underlying terrain. Wherever these ice titans traveled, they left behind exposed bedrock, polished smooth by their slow but absolutely merciless weight. Their passage carved out valleys that would later accommodate rivers and lakes, created dramatic cliffs and ridgelines that influenced migration routes for countless animal species, forcing them into unexplored territories and consequently generating fresh opportunities for the predators that depended on them for survival. Within the shadows cast by these towering glaciers, life demonstrated remarkable persistence and adaptation. Many of the Great Ice Age animals developed thick insulating fat layers beneath their protective hides, creating natural barriers against the brutal cold that defined their existence. Their coats weren't simply fur, but complex layered systems including dense undercoats of wool, so fine they could trap body heat directly against the skin with incredible efficiency. Even their circulatory systems evolved differently from modern animals. Certain species developed enhanced abilities to circulate warmth throughout their bodies more effectively, preventing their extremities from freezing solid even during the most savage windstorms that could last for weeks without interruption. Our human ancestors learned to coexist alongside these magnificent giants, recognizing that mammoth presence represented both tremendous danger and essential survival resources. From mammoth bones came the framework for shelters capable of withstanding Arctic storms. From their thick hides came clothing systems that could preserve human life in conditions that would kill unprotected individuals within hours. From their massive bodies came the concentrated calories necessary to sustain small hunting groups through the lengthy, bitter nights when darkness dominated the landscape for months at a time. The scale of this Ice Age world remained overwhelming regardless of perspective. Individual glaciers could extend across distances equivalent to traveling between major modern cities. Mammoth herds might require several days to completely pass any single observation point as they moved from one horizon to the opposite. Even the sky appeared more expansive, its pale illumination reflecting endlessly off snow and ice surfaces stretching in every conceivable direction. Ice surrendered to warmth, then reclaimed its territory with relentless determination. Creatures wandered across continents, transformed their bodies and behaviors to match new realities, or simply vanished into extinction's silent embrace. Throughout this cosmic ballet, our ancestors maintained their vigilant watch, absorbing lessons, tracking patterns, and shadowing the magnificent choreography between Earth and its frozen colossi. As we venture deeper into this crystalline antiquity, our attention shifts toward the powerful engine that orchestrated every single transformation, the bewildering complex fluctuations within our planet's climate system, and the mechanisms through which they triggered each monumental event that followed. The frigid temperatures never maintained steady consistency. Even during the most intense periods of glacial dominance, Earth refused to remain trapped within one unvarying deep freeze. Instead, it pulsed with life-giving rhythm. Across tens of thousands of years, global temperatures ascended and descended like oceanic tides moving in slow motion. With every climatic shift, massive ice sheets either advanced their frozen frontiers or withdrew to expose newly liberated territories, continuously reshaping both landscape and the countless lives that depended upon these changes for survival. Understanding this ancient world requires far more than simply envisioning a planet smothered beneath endless snow. We must witness how that snow relocated itself, observe the gradual deepening and eventual release of cold, and comprehend how these extended, quiet transformations authored the entire narrative of our planet's frozen era. The foundation of this rhythm consisted of predictable cycles that modern scientists can still trace with remarkable precision. These patterns bear the name Milankovitch cycles, honoring the brilliant mathematician who initially calculated their intricate sequences. They operate through Earth's orbital mechanics. Our planet doesn't travel around the sun in a perfect circular path, but instead performs an elaborate cosmic waltz that evolves across tens of thousands of years. Our orbital trajectory alternately stretches into elongated ellipses, then contracts toward more circular shapes. Earth's axial tilt increases and decreases like a slowly nodding head. Even our planet's subtle wobbling motion, resembling a spinning top gradually losing momentum, continuously alters how solar radiation reaches different geographical regions throughout the year. Each of these celestial movements progresses far too gradually for any single human generation to detect, yet combined they possess the power to transform everything about our world's climate. When the axial tilt decreases, northern hemisphere summers become noticeably cooler, winter snowfall persists longer into the following seasons, and ice accumulations steadily expand their coverage. Conversely, when the tilt increases substantially, summers intensify with greater warmth and duration, melting increased amounts of accumulated snow, forcing ice sheets into systematic retreat. This represents a delicate equilibrium, both subtle and absolutely relentless, oscillating our planet between frigid conditions and slightly less frigid states across enormous expanses of geological time. However, these orbital variations alone cannot account for the complete magnitude of ice age transformations. Earth's climate operates as an intricate network of feedback mechanisms where individual small changes trigger cascading effects throughout the entire system. As glaciers expand their coverage, they reflect substantially more solar radiation back towards space, which further cools the planet's surface temperatures. The colder global conditions become, the more efficiently oceans absorb atmospheric carbon dioxide, removing it from circulation and dramatically reducing greenhouse gas concentrations. This carbon dioxide reduction creates additional cooling effects, enabling ice sheets to spread across even greater territories. This creates a self-reinforcing chain reaction requiring millennia to fully develop and even longer periods to completely reverse direction. Yet the cyclical process operates bidirectionally with equal effectiveness. When Earth begins warming trends, precisely opposite reactions occur throughout the system. Ice melts rapidly, exposing dark soil and open water surfaces that absorb dramatically more solar heat than reflective ice. Ocean temperatures rise, releasing previously stored carbon dioxide back into atmospheric circulation, creating enhanced heat-trapping effects. The feedback loop reverses completely, and glacial retreat accelerates exponentially. Our planet doesn't simply plunge into ice ages or escape from them through random events. Instead, it oscillates between these contrasting states like a massive pendulum, while maintaining consistent rhythmic patterns while operating on scales too immense for human comprehension. Even within these grand climatic cycles, shorter-term disruptions created sudden temperature spikes or drops that sent shockwaves across the entire Ice Age world. Some originated from oceanic circulation as massive current systems shifted their pathways, redistributing thermal energy between equatorial and polar regions in completely new patterns. Others resulted from catastrophic volcanic eruptions that ejected ash and sulfur compounds high into the stratosphere, effectively dimming solar radiation for extended periods lasting several years. At the boundaries of enormous ice sheets, colossal lakes occasionally formed when meltwater became trapped behind natural dams constructed from frozen barriers. When these icy walls eventually failed under immense pressure, they released floods of such staggering magnitude that they permanently altered continental shorelines and potentially influenced global climate patterns for centuries afterward. Experiencing these transformations firsthand meant witnessing the world gradually lose its equilibrium before slowly stabilizing again. For animals inhabiting the steppes and scattered forests, survival required following the land as it continuously evolved around them. Mammoth and bison herds would migrate southward when severe cold penetrated deeply into their territories, only to expand northward again as ice sheets eventually withdrew from previously frozen regions. Predatory species tracked their prey through these migrations, while early human populations, consisting of small hunting and gathering communities, developed sophisticated abilities to interpret environmental patterns, moving strategically with seasonal changes and the constantly shifting boundaries between habitable and uninhabitable zones. The glaciers themselves served as detailed recording devices for these climatic oscillations. Every accumulated layer of compressed ice contains microscopic air bubbles that were trapped as snowfall gradually compressed over successive years. When modern scientists extract core samples by drilling deep into these layered archives, they can literally observe our planet's ancient breathing patterns preserved in frozen detail. These ice cores reveal fingerprints of every glacial advance and retreat, every sharp temperature decline or sudden warming period that occurred across hundreds of thousands of years. Within that crystalline library, the complete history of Ice Age climate changes remains perfectly preserved, arranged chronologically like pages in an enormous book written by time itself. Intellectually understanding these rhythms differs dramatically from truly visualizing their reality. Imagine positioning yourself on an expansive, windswept plain where the sky appears washed out and bitter winds cut through any protection. Toward the northern horizon, an enormous wall of ice rises like a mountain range constructed entirely from frozen water. For countless centuries, this glacier has been advancing steadily southward, progressing mile by mile in an invasion too slow for any living observer to detect. Then, after thousands of years pass, atmospheric conditions begin warming. Summer seasons gradually extend their duration. The glacier's leading edge starts its slow withdrawal, releasing torrents of meltwater that carve entirely new river systems. Land that remained buried beneath ice for millennia lies exposed, raw, and ready for sunlight's touch for the first time in ages. Eventually, inevitably, cold conditions return with renewed intensity, and the patient march of advancing ice begins its cycle once more. However, the Ice Age saga extends far beyond simple tales of freezing temperatures and returning warmth. This represents the chronicle of extraordinary life forms that flourished beneath that crystalline illumination. While climate conditions established the backdrop, it was existence itself, bizarre, colossal, and incredibly tenacious, that infused the Ice Age with its distinctive personality and unforgettable character. Underneath the perpetual cold and across those vast frozen territories, life persevered with remarkable determination. Rather than simply enduring until warmer conditions returned, living organisms adapted their bodies, evolved new survival mechanisms, and established thriving communities within one of the most punishing environments our planet has ever produced. Surviving these brutal conditions required far more than mere toughness mix. It demanded complete biological transformation, affecting everything from microscopic insects concealed beneath snow layers to the most massive creatures wandering across frozen steppes. The Ice Age terrain wasn't a sterile wasteland devoid of activity. Hidden just below the snow's surface existed an intricate miniature universe operating according to its own survival rules. Within tundra soils, countless rodents excavated elaborate tunnel systems, their compact bodies protected by barriers of earth and permafrost, acting as natural fortresses against the elements above. Lemmings, voles, and numerous other small mammals form the fundamental foundation supporting entire food webs, their continued survival enabling the existence of countless predatory species throughout the ecosystem. These diminutive creatures didn't simply enter prolonged hibernation states. Many maintained active lifestyles beneath protective snowpacks throughout the harshest months, their constant movement creating invisible pathways that crisscrossed the underground landscape. In those subterranean realms, air remained motionless and temperatures stayed relatively stable, while overhead snow acted as effective insulation against the most devastating surface winds. This hidden world buzzed with constant activity, mice reproduction, territory disputes, food storage, and complex social interactions that mirrored surface ecosystems but operated under completely different environmental constraints. Above this concealed universe, massive animals traversed the landscape with powerful, purposeful movements that left permanent impressions in frozen ground. Woolly mammoths encased themselves in extraordinary protective systems, outer layers of long, coarse hair combined with dense inner coats of insulating wool that could withstand temperatures capable of freezing exposed flesh within mere minutes of contact. Their circulatory systems carried specialized biological adaptations, enabling blood to efficiently deliver oxygen even to the coldest extremities of their enormous bodies, preventing dangerous stiffening that could prove fatal during extended exposure to Arctic conditions. These weren't simple physical modifications. They represented millions of years of evolutionary refinement, perfecting survival in impossible circumstances. Musk oxen developed protective pelts so incredibly effective that accumulated snow could rest on their backs without melting whatsoever, clear evidence that virtually no body heat escaped through their remarkable fur systems. Their compact, low-profile builds minimized surface area exposure, while maximizing internal heat retention, creating living furnaces capable of generating warmth in conditions that would instantly kill most modern animals. Predatory species demonstrated equally impressive cold weather preparations. Dire wolves and saber-toothed cats evolved powerful muscle structures designed for delivering devastating attacks while maintaining strength and endurance in deep snow conditions. Their protective coats provided complete thermal regulation, while their enlarged paws functioned like natural snowshoes, preventing them from sinking into frozen ground during extended hunting expeditions across vast territories. Even the magnificent cave lions, among the largest feline predators our planet has ever witnessed, bore the unmistakable marks of Ice Age adaptation. Though leaner than their contemporary relatives, they possessed limbs specifically engineered for tireless pursuit of massive prey across endless open terrain where stamina often determined survival more than raw strength alone. The vegetation supporting this frozen ecosystem proved equally extraordinary in its specialized adaptations. Initially, Ice Age landscapes might appear completely barren to casual observation, but beneath snow layers and during brief summer growing seasons, incredibly hardy plant communities flourished with surprising abundance and diversity. Specialized grasses dominated the mammoth steppes, creating continuous carpets of vegetation spanning enormous distances from European territories through North American plains. These weren't ordinary grasses. They contained concentrated nutrient levels perfectly calibrated for sustaining grazing herds that required nearly constant feeding to maintain body temperatures necessary for cold weather survival. Interspersed among grassland communities grew tough shrubs and dwarf willows, their branches hugging ground surfaces to escape relentless wind patterns that could strip leaves and damage stems exposed to full force. These plants evolved remarkable abilities to survive extended periods of complete darkness, interrupted by brief but intensely productive growing seasons, responding with explosive growth during short summer sunlight windows. Even tiny insects developed ingenious survival strategies that challenged basic assumptions about life's limitations. Some species produced natural antifreeze compounds within their cellular structures, specialized proteins preventing ice crystal formation that would otherwise cause fatal tissue damage. Others perfected egg-laying techniques that created virtually indestructible packages capable of surviving months of sub-zero conditions before hatching during favorable weather periods. Bird species demonstrated their own remarkable adaptations to Ice Age conditions. While many migrated toward warmer southern territories, others remained year-round, developing dense feather systems and metabolic rates capable of generating sufficient internal heat for surviving the deepest cold periods. Snowy owls exemplified this strategy perfectly, maintaining active hunting territories throughout tundra regions while feeding primarily on lemming populations and thriving in environments that defeated most other species entirely. Humans, despite their apparent physical vulnerability compared to other Ice Age inhabitants, compensated through unprecedented technological innovation and social cooperation. Early hunting and gathering communities relied on intellectual creativity as much as physical capabilities, crafting sophisticated clothing systems from carefully prepared animal furs stitched with precision to eliminate heat loss through gaps or poor fit. They constructed ingenious shelters using mammoth bones as structural frameworks, covering these frames with multiple layers of thick animal hides that created effective barriers against wind, snow, and temperature extremes. Fire technology became their most crucial survival tool, providing not only essential warmth but enabling food preparation, tool hardening, and psychological comfort during the endless darkness of Arctic winters. For these small human groups, existence meant constant negotiation with environmental challenges that could prove fatal within hours if handled incorrectly. Every venture into snow-covered terrain carried serious risks. Frost, frostbite, starvation, and predator encounters represented daily threats requiring careful planning and flawless execution of survival strategies developed through generations of accumulated knowledge. Yet they mastered techniques for moving efficiently with seasonal patterns, tracking migratory herds across vast distances while using rivers and distinctive landscape features as navigation aids through seemingly identical white expanses. They manufactured weapons from stone and bone materials, creating cutting edges sharp enough to penetrate the thick protective hides of the massive creatures they hunted for survival. These ice giants advanced with overwhelming power so immense and unstoppable that they completely transformed entire continental landmasses. When most people envision glaciers today, they typically picture motionless barriers of pristine frozen whiteness. However, these colossal ice formations weren't passive monuments standing silently in place. They operated as relentless transformation machines, pulverizing, demolishing, and sculpting the terrain beneath them with the kind of eternal patience that only geological forces possess. The most massive among these frozen titans completely blanketed enormous portions of the northern hemisphere. Throughout North America, the Laurentide ice sheet expanded from Arctic territories southward until it reached regions that would eventually become the central United States. This ice mass achieved such incredible thickness that its uppermost surface towered higher than the planet's tallest mountain peaks, creating artificial mountain ranges constructed entirely from compressed frozen water. On the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean, the Fennoscandian ice sheet conquered all of Scandinavia before launching its inexorable invasion deep into northern European territories, its leading edge advancing steadily forward like an unstoppable tsunami, composed of crystallized stone. Even throughout the southern hemisphere, smaller yet significant ice formations blanketed the elevated regions of South America, New Zealand, and Antarctic areas that extended considerably farther than their current boundaries. These enormous sheets of accumulated ice showed absolutely no mercy in their advance. As they progressed across landscapes, they systematically stripped Earth's surface completely bare of vegetation. They obliterated entire forest ecosystems, flattened elevated terrain features, and pulverized solid rock into microscopic particles. Under their unimaginable weight, the planet's very crust bent downward, sinking measurably under the tremendous load pressing upon it. When these ice masses eventually withdrew, the underlying land slowly rose again in a gradual rebound process that continues operating today throughout regions of Canada and Scandinavia. The passage of these ice titans left behind distinctive geographical signatures that remain easily identifiable across modern landscapes. Profound valleys featuring flat floors and dramatically steep walls carved through the persistent pressure of advancing glacial systems can be discovered throughout northern territories worldwide. Enormous boulders transported across hundreds of miles before being deposited far from their original locations sit distributed across open agricultural fields, serving as silent testimonies to the incredible journeys they completed while trapped within moving ice formations. Then there are the countless lakes and thousands upon thousands filling the depressions excavated by glacial action over millennia. The Great Lakes of North America represent perhaps the most spectacular example of this phenomenon, consisting of vast water bodies occupying the permanent scars created by the retreating Laurentide ice sheet's systematic excavation of the underlying bedrock. These glacial formations weren't simply sculptors working exclusively on terrestrial features. They simultaneously transformed the planet's water systems on a global scale. As ice accumulations expanded, ocean levels plummeted dramatically, revealing enormous coastal plains that had remained submerged for geological ages. When the ice eventually melted, rising seas reclaimed those same territories, submerging them once again beneath advancing waves. The land bridges that previously connected separate continents, such as the passage linking Asia with North America, existed solely because such massive quantities of planetary water remained locked within ice formations. Every fluctuation of glacial boundaries completely rewrote Earth's geographical configuration, creating and destroying continental connections with each major climatic shift. Despite their incredible transformative power, glaciers advanced with surprisingly measured pace, moving only several feet per day, was sufficient for their accumulated weight to completely alter continental appearances over extended timeframes. Standing before one of these advancing ice walls meant confronting a force that seemed absolutely eternal, despite its constant state of motion. Observers could occasionally hear the glacier's presence use sharp cracking sounds of shifting ice masses, deep groaning noises of frozen material pressing against underlying terrain with irresistible force. When accumulated meltwater gathered sufficient pressure before breaking free, it erupted across landscapes in floods so catastrophic they carved entirely new drainage channels within days. These weren't gentle waterways flowing peacefully toward lower elevations. They attacked the terrain with devastating strength derived from centuries of trapped water suddenly liberated from its icy prison. Yet in their destructive wake, these frozen bulldozers created something entirely unexpected. Despite their capacity for wholesale destruction, glaciers simultaneously generated fresh opportunities for biological communities to establish themselves. When ice sheets retreated, they revealed newly exposed ground stripped completely clean and enriched with mineral-rich sediment ground from underlying bedrock. Plant communities quickly colonized these barren landscapes, sending root systems deep into virgin soil that had never before supported vegetation. Eventually, animal populations followed these pioneering plant communities, and behind them came the earliest human hunters, tracking migrating herds into territories that glaciers had recently abandoned. These frozen sculptures also preserved detailed historical records within their layered structures. Within the ice itself, researchers have discovered trapped samples of ancient atmospheric gases, volcanic ash from eruptions occurring thousands of miles away, and even preserved pollen from plant species that flourished in distant eras. Each accumulated layer functions as a chronological record, representing individual pages within Earth's frozen historical archive, revealing not only how ice shaped physical landscapes, but also how it fluctuated in harmony with changing climatic patterns. For the creatures experiencing these transformations firsthand, however, glaciers weren't historical phenomena to be studied. They represented absolute boundaries, massive and seemingly immovable barriers defining the limits of their world. To a mammoth or bison, a glacier's edge marked the literal end of habitable territory, creating an insurmountable wall that simply could not be crossed or challenged. Even humans, despite their intelligence and determination, could only navigate along glacial perimeters, following river valleys and mountain passes where ice hadn't yet claimed dominion over the landscape. As ice sheets expanded and contracted according to the planet's slow climatic pulse, they continuously redrew the map of our modern world. Every gently rolling hill throughout northern Europe, each scattered lake dotting the Canadian landscape, every stretch of fertile agricultural soil across the American Midwest, all bear permanent marks left by glacial activity. These weren't merely accumulations of frozen water sitting passively on the landscape. They were the precision tools that literally carved and shaped Earth's current surface features. Yet, as they carved terrestrial landscapes, they simultaneously transformed oceanic systems. When enormous quantities of water became locked within their frozen masses, global oceans retreated significantly. Continental shelves extended outward as new territories emerged from beneath receding waves. And within those newly exposed regions, life forms, whether animal, human, or otherwise, discovered unexpected pathways toward survival and expansion. When these colossal ice sheets reached maximum size and imprisoned such vast amounts of planetary water, oceanic systems withdrew like massive tides that wouldn't return for thousands of years. Continental boundaries stretched outward dramatically, exposing enormous plains that had remained concealed beneath marine environments for countless ages. River systems carved fresh courses across this revealed terrain, and entire continents acquired completely new coastal configurations. During peak glacial periods, sea levels dropped more than 100 meters below current measurements. This wasn't a rapid plunge, but rather a gradual withdrawal synchronized with the systematic growth of ice accumulations. Former shallow coastal waters transformed into windswept grassland ecosystems, bays and inlets became dry valleys, isolated islands connected with mainland territories, and land bridges materialized between continents currently separated by open ocean. This wasn't merely a geographical feature or temporary land formation. It represented a complete ecosystem, a sovereign territory teeming with its own unique forms of existence and operating as authentically as any established region on our planet. Moving towards southern latitudes, the Sunda Shelf created permanent connections between Southeast Asian islands and continental mainland areas, forging an enormous unified landmass that supported unprecedented biological diversity and migration patterns. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania fused together into one massive interconnected continent, eliminating oceanic barriers that had previously isolated these territories for millions of years. Throughout European regions, the North Sea floor lay completely exposed, forming what modern researchers identify as Doggerland Mix-Sun-Siv Plain, extending between Britain and continental Europe, characterized by intricate river networks and scattered elevation features that created diverse habitat zones. These newly revealed territories accomplished far more than simple geographical restructuring. They fundamentally altered the trajectory of evolutionary development and species distribution across the globe. Animal populations pursued these expanding frontiers with determination, migrating into regions where oceanic boundaries had previously prevented their passage for countless generations. Human communities followed identical patterns, pursuing game animals across these fresh pathways while gradually dispersing throughout the world in ways that would permanently influence our species' future development. However, this dramatic transformation extended beyond terrestrial changes alone. The oceanic retreat simultaneously reshaped remaining coastal environments with equal intensity. Shorelines extended outward across vast distances, estuarine systems contracted significantly, and coral reef communities found themselves stranded far above water levels, gradually bleaching and perishing as marine environments abandoned them entirely. The planet's oceanic systems became substantially colder and more saline, with circulation patterns shifting dramatically in response to the altered equilibrium between frozen water reserves and liquid marine environments. These oceanic changes created feedback mechanisms that reinforce climatic conditions, helping maintain Earth's frozen state through complex interconnected processes that amplified cooling effects across multiple environmental systems. Even atmospheric conditions above marine areas underwent significant modifications. As oceanic boundaries retreated, enormous stretches of exposed continental shelf became primary sources of airborne particles, collected by powerful Ice Age wind systems and transported across thousands of miles before settling in distant locations. This atmospheric dust eventually accumulated into thick, nutrient-rich deposits that would later support some of Earth's most productive agricultural regions. Another demonstration that the Ice Age represented not only destruction but preparation, establishing foundations for post-glacial civilizations. For contemporary inhabitants, however, these transformations remained largely invisible during their lifetimes. Oceanic retreat didn't occur through sudden dramatic events. Individual hunters could traverse identical routes their ancestors had followed, completely unaware that far beyond their immediate territories, water boundaries were gradually receding year after year through imperceptible increments. Only across generational timescales did these changes become apparent in rivers flowing through areas that had previously been marine bays, grazing herds occupying territories that had once been ocean floors, and new horizons beckoning the adventurous individuals brave enough to explore them. While oceanic systems remained in suspended animation, biological communities adapted with remarkable flexibility and innovation. Coastal zones transformed into productive hunting territories. River mouths evolved into abundant feeding stations for migratory bird populations and fish communities, and human societies learned to exploit these environmental changes strategically, following animal migration trails that now traverse these exposed plains with unprecedented accessibility. Throughout every region of the Ice Age world, retreating waters revealed not simply additional land area, but genuine opportunities for expansion, innovation, and survival. Yet similar to the glacial formations themselves, oceanic systems wouldn't maintain these configurations permanently. As climatic conditions eventually warmed, ice accumulations would begin their retreat, and marine waters would gradually reclaim territories they had previously abandoned. Doggerland would disappear beneath North Sea waters, Beringia would vanish under the Bering Strait, and global coastlines would return toward configurations resembling our modern geographical arrangements. However, that portion of the narrative remained far in the future. For the present moment, during the peak of Ice Age conditions, oceanic systems had reached equilibrium, maintaining our planet in its frozen state through a delicate balance between ice formations and marine environments that sustained global stability across thousands of years. Within this frozen equilibrium, massive wind systems began developing and transporting their burdens of atmospheric particles across continental distances, introducing the next major force that would define this ancient world's character and environmental conditions. The frigid temperatures alone didn't completely characterize Ice Age conditions. Accompanying the glacial formations and lowered sea levels came atmospheric conditions heavy with suspended particles and wind patterns that seemed to operate without cessation. The atmosphere during this period didn't resemble the clear, pristine air we might envision when picturing a frozen landscape. Instead, it contained countless fine particles transported across continents, creating hazy solar conditions and painting skies in pale, subdued colors that differed dramatically from modern atmospheric clarity. These airborne particles originated from territories that ice had recently abandoned. When glacial formations advanced across landscapes, they pulverized underlying rock formations into microscopic powder. As ice sheets retreated or remained stationary along their boundaries, wind systems swept across these barren territories, lifting the finest particles into atmospheric circulation and driving them across hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles before eventual deposition. Each major storm system contributed additional material, spreading blankets of dust that settled far from their original sources. Throughout many regions, these accumulated layers remain preserved today as geological evidence of Ice Age atmospheric conditions. Loess deposits, as scientists designate them, extend across China, portions of Europe and North America, reaching hundreds of feet in thickness in certain locations, built incrementally through countless Ice Age wind events. Eventually, these dust-covered plains would develop into some of Earth's most fertile agricultural soils. During the Ice Age itself, however, they participated in an endless environmental cycle dominated by wind, dust, and unrelenting cold temperatures that shaped atmospheric conditions across the entire planet. Weather patterns responsible for transporting this atmospheric dust operated with harsh unpredictability. Enormous temperature differentials between frozen northern territories and relatively warmer southern regions generated powerful wind systems that scoured landscapes, compacting snow into hardened sheets, while eliminating whatever minimal warmth might have been available. These winds carried not only dust particles but massive snow loads, creating drifts capable of completely burying entire landscape features. Yet Ice Age atmospheric conditions represented more than simply wind and dust phenomena. This was an environment of absolute extremes where environmental conditions pushed survival limits to their maximum boundaries. Winters extended across lengthy periods with temperatures plunging far below anything most modern humans could comprehend or endure. Summers, though abbreviated, could achieve surprisingly warm conditions in certain regions, particularly across extensive grassland areas where solar radiation faced minimal cloud interference. These dramatic seasonal contrasts created environments where survival required constant adaptability. Organisms needed capabilities for enduring severe freezing conditions, while simultaneously being prepared to exploit brief periods of growth and resource abundance when favorable conditions presented themselves. Atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations during Ice Age periods plummeted to levels dramatically lower than contemporary measurements, creating greenhouse conditions so minimal they fundamentally transformed global weather patterns. This severely weakened atmospheric blanket generated colder, more arid conditions, particularly concentrated near massive ice sheet formations. Throughout these regions, snowfall occurred infrequently, not because extreme temperatures prevented precipitation, but because atmospheric moisture content had dropped to nearly negligible levels. Ironically, the frozen core of Ice Age territories often resembled snow deserts where wind and ice dominated landscapes, with surfaces constantly scoured by atmospheric forces rather than buried beneath accumulating fresh precipitation. This created one of the most striking contradictions of the Ice Age environment: regions of intense cold that remained surprisingly dry due to the absence of water vapor in the drastically thinned atmosphere. For creatures inhabiting this harsh world, weather patterns weren't temporary inconveniences to be endured. They represented fundamental forces that determined survival strategies and influenced every behavioral decision. Mammoth and bison herds developed sophisticated techniques for following wind patterns to locate areas where atmospheric forces had cleared snow cover, revealing buried vegetation essential for sustenance during the harshest months. Predatory species tracked these grazing migrations with deadly precision, their own survival completely dependent on understanding identical meteorological patterns that governed prey movement across vast territories. Early human populations learned to interpret atmospheric signs with remarkable accuracy, studying wind directions and cloud formations to predict weather shifts and anticipate periods when cold conditions would intensify beyond survival limits. Airborne dust particles carried their own complex consequences throughout this transformed world. While these suspended materials dulled solar radiation and coated landscapes in fine sediment, they simultaneously nourished biological communities through unexpected mechanisms. Wind systems deposited essential nutrients across extensive plains, distributing mineral concentrations that transformed Ice Age grasslands into surprisingly fertile ecosystems, capable of supporting enormous animal populations. This represented one of the most fascinating paradoxes characterizing Ice Age environments: the atmospheric conditions filled with dust and relentless winds, yet supporting terrain capable of sustaining countless massive herds through productive vegetation systems that thrived, despite seemingly impossible growing conditions. Visualize positioning yourself on one of those wind-scoured expanses where horizons stretch endlessly beneath pale, washed-out skies. The atmosphere carries a razor-sharp quality that cuts through any protection, while winds maintain constant motion that never completely subsides. Distant atmospheric haze hangs suspended like a translucent veil composed of dust particles stirred by storms occurring hundreds of miles away. Above this entire scene, solar radiation penetrates weakly, providing illumination that reaches ground level but never generates sufficient warmth to eliminate the persistent bite of frigid air temperatures. In that environment, observers could experience firsthand what existence meant beneath Ice Age atmospheric conditions, simultaneously harsh and restless, yet paradoxically abundant with biological activity and survival opportunities. These atmospheric conditions, with their characteristic dust loads and sweeping wind patterns, weren't merely background elements of the Ice Age story. They operated as active forces helping sculpt planetary features and evolutionary adaptations throughout countless species. As atmospheric currents moved continuously across continents, they transported the fundamental elements that would create the world lying beneath the grassland ecosystems that extended beyond visual limits and provided Ice Age environments with their most distinctive characteristic: endless frozen steppes, where giants roamed and survival unfolded on scales matching the vastness of the territories themselves. Extending from Western European territories across Siberian expanses and continuing into North American regions, there existed landscapes completely unlike anything visible in modern times. These weren't frozen tundra zones or dense forest ecosystems, but something occupying the middle ground between these extremes: vast, windswept grassland systems that supported some of the most spectacular animal gatherings in Earth's entire history. Scientific communities identify this ecosystem as the Mammoth Steppe, and it represented the pulsing heart of Ice Age civilization. The Mammoth Steppe achieved dimensions larger than any individual biome existing on our contemporary planet. Despite cold, arid atmospheric conditions and abbreviated growing seasons that might seem prohibitively harsh, these grasslands demonstrated astonishing biological productivity that challenged assumptions about what environments could support. Thick carpets of hardy grasses and specialized herbs blanketed the ground, perfectly adapted to exploit brief seasonal growth windows with maximum efficiency. These plant communities didn't waste precious energy attempting to reach skyward like forest trees. Instead, they maintained low profiles, staying close to ground level where wind forces couldn't strip away accumulated warmth, where root systems could establish firm holds in the thin, mineral-rich soils deposited by retreating glacial formations. This grass abundance enabled massive creatures to flourish in numbers that seem impossible by modern standards. Woolly mammoth herds wandered the steppes in enormous congregations, their curved tusks sweeping steadily as they excavated through snow layers to access buried vegetation. Steppe bison grazed in formations extending beyond horizon limits, their dense protective coats undulating with each wind gust that swept across open territories. Wild horses, considerably smaller and more robust than contemporary breeds, galloped across these plains in tightly coordinated groups that moved like single organisms responding to environmental pressures. Scattered throughout these herds were woolly rhinoceroses, massive, broad-shouldered animals equipped with formidable horns used for clearing snow obstacles or defending against predators bold enough to challenge such intimidating quarry. The predatory species inhabiting mammoth steppe environments were equally formidable in their adaptations and hunting capabilities. Dire wolf packs pursued migrating herds with relentless determination, their enlarged body structures and powerful jaw mechanisms providing the strength necessary for bringing down even the most challenging prey species. Cave lions, achieving nearly double the size of modern African lions, conducted coordinated hunting campaigns, stalking along grassland perimeters with sophisticated group strategies. Then there were the saber-toothed cats, specialized ambush hunters that maintained patient vigils while waiting for perfect striking opportunities. their elongated curved fangs engineered for delivering deep, rapid wounds that could disable massive prey within seconds. However, this ecosystem supported far more than just the largest, most dramatic species. Smaller creatures occupied every available ecological niche with remarkable efficiency. Lemmings and ground squirrels excavated extensive burrow networks beneath surface layers, their tunnel systems creating invisible transportation webs throughout frozen soil structures. Arctic foxes darted across steppe territories with incredible agility, scavenging from kills abandoned by larger predators or hunting the rodent populations that thrived just beneath their feet. Ravens and vultures maintained constant aerial patrols, circling overhead while monitoring for opportunities to descend whenever snow became stained crimson by fresh kills. Eventually, human populations arrived in these territories, though considerably later than other inhabitants. When they finally established themselves, they became integral components of the ecosystem. Early hunting societies followed herds across open plains with systematic precision, tracking mammoth and bison movements while learning behavioral patterns and testing survival skills against the enormity of this frozen wilderness. They constructed shelters using mammoth bone frameworks covered with animal hides to create barriers against relentless wind forces, and they created artistic representations of hunted creatures on cave walls, producing images that served as both admiration records and survival documentation of their relationship with this extraordinary environment. Horizons extended endlessly in all directions, completely uninterrupted by forest barriers or mountain obstacles that might break the visual continuity of this extraordinary landscape. Atmospheric currents swept steadily across these territories, transporting the subdued sounds of distant animal congregations and the hunting calls of predators pursuing their quarry through systematic campaigns that could span days across open terrain. Every living organism, from the most diminutive rodent species to the most colossal mammoth specimens, participated within a single interconnected biological network that transformed basic grass and atmospheric dust into living tissue and skeletal structures, operating on scales almost beyond human comprehension. This represented nature's most ambitious experiment in large-scale ecosystem management, where energy flowed through food webs with an efficiency that modern environments have never matched. However, this magnificent world, despite its impressive dimensions and apparent permanence, wasn't destined for eternal existence. Its continued functioning depended entirely on sustained cold temperatures to maintain the delicate environmental balance that allowed such extraordinary biodiversity to flourish. When climatic conditions began shifting, when massive ice formations started their inevitable retreat, and when forest ecosystems began their northward expansion, the steppe territories gradually contracted. The great herds that had defined this ecosystem found themselves compressed into increasingly smaller refuges as their traditional grazing grounds transformed into incompatible habitats. Eventually, these grasslands of giants became historical memories, preserved only through fossil remains and frozen specimens that occasionally emerge from thawing permafrost layers. Before that transformational day arrived, however, the mammoth steppe functioned as one of the most spectacular natural theatres Earth had ever produced. Within these territories, human populations refined their survival techniques through countless generations of adaptation and innovation. Here, the final Great Ice Age creatures maintained their dominion over vast territories that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of imagination itself. Within this cold and dust-laden grassland environment, life discovered methods for enduring extreme conditions in ways that would influence survival strategies long after the steppe itself disappeared beneath advancing forests and changing climate patterns. From this expansive stage, our narrative transitions toward the people who traversed these territories, not merely as temporary wanderers passing through, but as dedicated survivors who confronted a world dominated by ice and wind, while ultimately finding ways to establish it as their permanent home. Throughout mammoth steppe territories and along the boundaries of advancing ice sheets, small human communities moved in harmony with seasonal patterns, following ancient rhythms that governed all life in these frozen domains. They hadn't yet achieved mastery over this crystalline wilderness, but their learning process was accelerating with each passing generation. In territories ruled by bitter atmospheric currents and towering creatures, survival required far more than physical strength alone. They demanded accumulated knowledge, refined technical skills, and above all else, the capacity for rapid adaptation to constantly changing environmental conditions. Existence for these early human populations was shaped completely by unrelenting cold temperatures that influenced every aspect of daily life and long-term planning. They constructed their shelters using low-profile designs that offered maximum resistance to wind forces, carefully selecting building techniques that could withstand the harshest weather conditions their environment could generate. Throughout treeless regions where timber resources remained completely unavailable, they developed innovative solutions by utilizing mammoth remains as primary construction materials. Rib bones, massive tusks, and enormous skulls were systematically arranged into structural frameworks, then covered with multiple layers of animal hides to create dwelling spaces capable of excluding even the most severe winter atmospheric conditions. Interior spaces remained cramped but effectively warm, illuminated by the steady glow of humanity's most essential survival tool, missy fire. This controlled combustion represented far more than simple technology. It established the fundamental boundary separating survival from certain death in environments where temperatures could kill unprotected humans within hours. Around flickering flames, family units gathered in tight formations, their fur garments pulled closely around their bodies, hands extended toward life-giving warmth that made continued existence possible. Fire cooked their food to eliminate parasites and increase nutritional availability, hardened their wooden weapons to improve hunting effectiveness, and provided crucial protection against the endless darkness characterizing Ice Age nights that could extend for months during winter seasons. A single maintained flame could represent safety within a world where deadly cold waited just beyond shelter walls, with patient, unforgiving persistence. However, fire alone couldn't guarantee survival in these extreme conditions. Human populations learned to shape stone materials into cutting implements, scraping tools, and spear points sharp enough to penetrate the thick protective hides of mammoths and bison that constituted their primary food sources. They manufactured specialized implements from bone and antler materials, with each tool designed using precision engineering born from absolute necessity and refined through generations of trial and error experimentation. Hunting activities in this environment never represented simple endeavors that could be accomplished through individual effort alone. Success required sophisticated cooperation strategies, where small groups coordinated their efforts to track prey animals across vast open territories, driving them toward prepared ambush locations or positioning them within range of waiting hunters, equipped with carefully crafted spear weapons. A single successful hunting expedition could provide sustenance for numerous community members across extended periods, while failed attempts could result in dangerous hunger lasting for days or even weeks. Even within these harsh conditions, human creativity found expression through artistic endeavors that transcended mere survival necessities. Throughout caves and temporary shelters scattered across European and Asian territories, they created paintings and carved decorations featuring mammoth, bison, horse, and reindeer images, rendered with careful attention to anatomical details that suggested intimate familiarity with their subjects. These artistic works weren't simply decorative elements added to living spaces. They may have served educational functions, helping preserve important knowledge, or even fulfilled spiritual purposes related to hope and connection with the natural world. Their existence provides evidence that even in environments where daily existence required constant struggle against harsh conditions, human communities still maintained capacity for activities that extended beyond basic survival requirements. Clothing systems also evolved into sophisticated forms of environmental adaptation. Early human populations learned to stitch fur materials together, using carefully crafted bone needles, creating layered garment systems that prevented cold temperatures from penetrating to skin level. Footwear lined with grass materials and thick hide provided essential protection for feet traversing icy ground surfaces that could cause frostbite within minutes of direct contact. Each clothing component was shaped through accumulated experience, refined across multiple generations of experimentation until humans could face severe wind and snow conditions while maintaining mobility and body temperature necessary for continued survival activities. The persistent cold demanded this type of relentless innovation and problem-solving capability. Every tool design, each shelter construction technique, and all fire maintenance procedures represented responses to the same fundamental challenge. How do we continue living in this environment? Gradually, through accumulated knowledge and shared experience, human populations learned to flourish in territories where unprepared individuals would have perished within days. They observed animal behaviors with scientific precision, studying migration patterns and territorial usage strategies that could be adapted for human benefit. They followed herd movements toward fresh grazing areas, utilized water sources created by glacial meltwater, and developed mental mapping systems based on memory rather than written records or symbolic representations. These weren't the thriving metropolitan centers or magnificent empires that would emerge in future millennia. Instead, they represented modest gatherings of individuals united by survival imperatives, their identities molded by the harsh territories they traversed daily. Every footstep across frozen ground, each critical decision made under pressure, every flame they kindled against the encompassing darkness contributed to humanity's gradual progression forward, a quiet but unwavering resolve to flourish in an environment that appeared specifically engineered to eliminate their existence entirely. As fires flickered defiantly against the surrounding blackness, the brutal cold beyond their shelters never truly diminished its relentless assault. Massive ice formations continued dominating distant horizons like frozen mountain ranges that stretched beyond imagination. Atmospheric currents persistently transported fine particles across vast plains, creating the distinctive haze that characterized their world. Yet within those vulnerable circles of warmth and light, human communities persevered with remarkable determination. Through this persistence, they initiated transformations that would extend far beyond the Ice Age itself, creating legacies that would influence civilization long after the final glaciers retreated. The harsh conditions wouldn't destroy their spirit, and instead, these challenges would forge them into something stronger, more adaptable, and more innovative. In that transformative process, they would establish the fundamental foundations for everything that human achievement would eventually become. Surrounded by the protective glow of their carefully maintained fires, with fierce winds pressing constantly against their shelter walls, humans began accomplishing far more than simple endurance. They discovered how to manipulate their environment using intelligence and creativity, developing technologies that gave them increasing control over their circumstances. Every implement they carefully chipped from stone materials, each line they deliberately drew on cave surfaces, represented another advancement toward mastering Ice Age conditions rather than merely surviving them through luck and determination alone. Stone became their most reliable and abundant resource for technological development. From riverbeds and exposed cliff faces, they systematically collected flint and chert materials, fracturing them apart through precisely calculated strikes to produce razor-sharp cutting surfaces that could accomplish tasks impossible with bare hands alone. Initially, their tools remained relatively simple, basic flakes designed for scraping animal hides or cutting meat portions, but across successive generations, these implements evolved into increasingly sophisticated instruments. Skilled hunters learned to manufacture long, narrow blade designs that could be securely attached to wooden spear shafts, transforming simple stabbing weapons into deadly hunting implements capable of bringing down the largest creatures roaming the steppes. They shaped bone and antler materials into barbed points and specialized hooks, creating tools engineered for precision applications rather than depending solely on brute force techniques. These weapons represented far more than mere survival instruments. They provided concrete evidence of humanity's growing capacity for forward-thinking planning, demonstrating their ability to envision solutions before problems actually manifested themselves. However, tool manufacturing extended well beyond hunting applications alone. Specialized scrapers smoothed rough animal hides into soft, workable leather, suitable for protective clothing construction. Carefully crafted awls pierced precise holes for stitching purposes, enabling people to sew garments that fitted tightly enough to eliminate wind penetration through gaps or loose areas. In environments where exposure to elements could prove fatal within hours, the ability to manufacture well-constructed coats or protective footwear became as essential as any weapon for ensuring continued survival through harsh weather conditions. Alongside these practical technological developments emerged something completely unexpected in such a harsh survival environment: artistic expression. Deep within cave systems far removed from solar illumination, humans created marks that would endure for tens of thousands of years, surviving long after their creators had disappeared. They painted detailed representations of mammoths, bison, and horses, their distinctive outlines traced using ochre pigments and charcoal materials gathered from their surroundings. Some artistic scenes remained relatively simple, while others depicted entire herds captured with such careful attention to anatomical detail that even contemporary observers can sense the muscles and movement that seem vibrantly alive despite their ancient origins. Handprint impressions pressed directly against cave walls still remain perfectly preserved, as though the individuals who created them were attempting to communicate across vast temporal distances, leaving permanent signs that they had existed, that they had witnessed this extraordinary world and desperately wanted future generations to remember their experiences. Nobody can definitively determine their motivations for creating these artistic works. Perhaps these images served ritual purposes, representing attempts to invoke hunting success or honor the creatures upon which their survival depended so completely. They might have functioned as educational tools, helping teach younger community members to recognize the distinctive shapes and behavioral patterns of animals they would eventually need to track and hunt. Alternatively, they could have been simple expressions of something fundamentally human, the irrepressible urge to create beauty and meaning, even when external conditions remained brutal and unforgiving. Carved sculptures also appeared during this period, consisting of small figures manufactured from bone or ivory materials. Some were shaped to resemble animals, while others depicted human forms with varying degrees of anatomical accuracy. The most renowned among these artifacts are the Venus figurines, rounded, stylized representations of the human body, whose specific purpose remains mysterious to modern researchers. Nevertheless, they provide clear evidence of minds that extended their concerns beyond immediate necessities like food procurement and shelter construction. These represented the earliest manifestations of imagination and abstract thinking, proving that even within the shadows cast by enormous glaciers, humans possessed an innate need to give physical form to complex ideas and concepts. These same innovative minds developed increasingly sophisticated methods for organizing their social lives and survival strategies. Hunting parties operated through carefully coordinated group efforts, mastering techniques for driving prey animals toward predetermined locations where waiting spears could deliver fatal strikes. They tracked herd movement patterns with scientific precision, timing seasonal migrations, and creating detailed mental maps of territorial features stored entirely in memory systems. Around their evening fires, community members shared accumulated knowledge, techniques for stone chipping, methods for hide stitching, strategies for selecting safe river crossing points during dangerous meltwater periods. Nothing was recorded in written form, yet nothing valuable was ever permanently lost. Each essential skill was transmitted from experienced individuals to newcomers through direct demonstration and practice, creating unbroken chains of survival knowledge that stretched continuously through generations of harsh conditions. Even the fundamental process of fire creation underwent significant evolution. Early humans progressed beyond simply maintaining existing flames to developing reliable methods for generating fire from raw materials. Using flint and pyrite combinations, they learned to strike controlled sparks into carefully prepared tinder, nurturing tiny embers until they expanded into steady, sustainable flames. Fire was no longer a fortunate accident captured from lightning strikes or maintained through constant vigilance and anxiety. It became a controllable resource they could create and direct according to their specific needs, and within that mastery lay the essential foundation supporting all future technological achievements. Yet it was artistic expression that revealed the most profound transformation occurring within human consciousness. In the dancing illumination provided by torch flames, bare cave walls were transformed into something far beyond simple stone surfaces. They became stages for preserving memory and creating meaning through visual representation. This frozen realm also served as the exclusive territory of apex predators, Ionisei creatures meticulously sculpted by relentless cold into flawless killing machines, engineered for survival in impossible conditions. Traversing these crystalline plains meant maintaining perpetual vigilance, knowing that lethal threats stalked invisibly through every shadow, their ominous presence woven into the very fabric of this landscape, just as permanently as accumulated snow and howling winds that never ceased their assault. The most terrifying among these hunters were the legendary saber-toothed cats, whose elongated curved fangs have evolved into universal symbols representing the entire Ice Age epoch. These weren't simple teeth. They were precision-engineered blades constructed from bone and enamel, capable of delivering devastating wounds that could penetrate deeply into the vital organs of their unsuspecting victims. These magnificent predators weren't designed for extended pursuit scenarios across vast distances. Their muscular legs provided tremendous power despite their relatively short length, while their compact, stocky bodies concentrated incredible strength throughout their shoulders and neck regions. They operated as specialized ambush hunters, maintaining patient vigils concealed within sparse shrubs or positioned along river valley edges until vulnerable bison or juvenile mammoths wandered within striking distance of their hidden locations. When they launched their attacks, the violence was instantaneous and absolutely brutal, like was those deadly fangs penetrating target zones before prey animals could even register the threat, let alone attempt escape maneuvers. The entire encounter from initial strike to final kill often lasted mere seconds, demonstrating the lethal efficiency these predators had perfected through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. However, saber-toothed cats weren't the only formidable hunters demanding constant wariness from other Ice Age inhabitants. Tintothymes, achieving nearly double the dimensions of contemporary African lions, patrolled mammoth steppe territories with systematic thoroughness. Unlike the predominantly solitary hunting behavior exhibited by saber-toothed species, these colossal felines likely coordinated their attacks through sophisticated group strategies, their cooperative tactics providing decisive advantages when confronting even the most massive prey animals. Envision entire packs of these apex predators spreading across snow-covered terrain in coordinated formations, their golden coats blending seamlessly with pale atmospheric lighting conditions, their enormous paws moving with ghostly silence across frozen ground surfaces. Few creatures could survive concentrated assaults from predators possessing such extraordinary size combined with intelligent pack hunting methodologies. Then there were the dire wolves, significantly heavier and more powerful than any modern wolf populations. They traveled in enormous packs that transformed them into arguably the most lethal organized force throughout the entire Ice Age ecosystem. These persistent hunters would follow migrating herds across hundreds of miles, systematically exhausting their chosen targets through relentless pursuit until fatigue made the final kill virtually inevitable. For human populations, these wolves represented both dangerous competitors and ominous warnings about the constant threats surrounding their existence. The haunting sound of wolf howls echoing across steppe territories served as perpetual reminders that within this frozen wilderness, even the most skilled hunters could never consider themselves completely secure from becoming prey themselves. Even smaller predatory species maintained significant positions within this hierarchy of fear and survival. Wolverines, despite their relatively modest size, demonstrated such fierce determination and relentless aggression that they could successfully drive away creatures many times their own body weight from fresh kills. Arctic foxes darted strategically around the periphery of major hunts, opportunistically stealing whatever meat scraps they could obtain through stealth and speed. Birds of prey maintained constant aerial surveillance, circling patiently overhead while monitoring for opportunities to descend upon carcass, remains abandoned by the major hunters of this frozen realm. These scavenging networks ensured that virtually no available protein went unutilized in an environment where caloric resources represented the difference between survival and death. Humans couldn't exist outside this intricate predatory network. They were integral participants, whether they preferred it or not. Whenever they ventured beyond their protective shelters to hunt game or scavenge from abandoned kills, they risked potentially fatal encounters with these dangerous competitors. A single tactical error or moment of inattention could instantly transform successful hunters into helpless prey for creatures perfectly adapted to killing in these conditions. This constant environmental pressure forced human communities to adopt extremely cautious behavioral patterns, compelling them to travel exclusively in protective groups and maintain bright fires throughout nighttime hours that served dual purposes as sources of warmth and warning signals to potential threats. The visible glow emanating from campfires represented fragile barriers against encroaching darkness, yet proved sufficient for keeping deadly shadows at safe distances. The complex relationship between humans and apex predators extended far beyond simple fear dynamics. It encompassed elements of direct competition, grudging respect, and careful territorial negotiation. When early hunting parties tracked bison herds across vast distances, They frequently discovered themselves following identical trails recently used by dire wolf packs pursuing the same quarry. When they arrived at mammoth carcasses hoping to scavenge valuable meat and materials, they often found saber-toothed cats already feeding on the choicest portions. During these tense confrontations, survival depended not only on physical strength or superior weapons, but on psychological nerve, on understanding precisely when circumstances warranted fighting, when retreat represented the wisest option, and when patience allowed larger predators to finish feeding before moving on to other territories. Eventually, human ingenuity discovered methods for shifting these dangerous power balances in their favor. Carefully crafted spears provided extended reach that kept deadly claws and fangs at safer distances. Controlled fire created weapons that even the most fearless predators instinctively avoided challenging. Gradually, humans evolved beyond simply being prey animals that occasionally fought back. They transformed into legitimate rivals that demanded recognition and respect from other apex predators. Nevertheless, this never represented true dominance over their environment. Instead, it established an uneasy truce based on mutual necessity, a delicate coexistence within vast open steppes where every living organism competed for the same precious calories contained within meat and fat reserves that meant the difference between surviving another day or perishing in the endless cold. These apex predators influenced human behavior patterns just as profoundly as they shaped the behavioral adaptations of grazing herds. The perpetual need for vigilance, maintaining constant alertness and planning every movement with tactical precision became fundamental aspects of daily existence rather than temporary precautions. Perhaps most importantly, the constant presence of saber-toothed cats and cave lions taught humans invaluable lessons about cooperation and mutual dependence. Isolated individuals remained fatally vulnerable to attack, but communities gathered around protective fires equipped with manufactured tools and capable of coordinated vocal communication possessed realistic chances for survival and eventual success. The Ice Age created an environment that never permitted anyone, Myers, whether human or animals, to forget about the deadly threats lurking just beyond the protective reach of firelight. The predators inhabiting permafrost territories served as constant reminders that survival could never be taken for granted, that complacency represented a potentially fatal mistake in environments where death waited patiently for any sign of weakness or inattention. Yet within this perilous world, humans refined not only their spear-crafting techniques, but their intellectual capabilities, evolving into something far more sophisticated than merely another animal species traversing the steppes. As these magnificent hunters prowled through snow-covered territories and fierce winds swept across frozen plains, the stage was perfectly arranged for an epic struggle that would ultimately determine the fate of the giants ruling these lands. A decisive conflict that would establish which species possessed the adaptability necessary for long-term survival, and which would fade into the historical memory of the Ice Age itself. The Ice Age represented a world operating on unprecedented scales of grandeur and danger. Everywhere observers looked, they encountered something larger, stranger, or more formidable than anything inhabiting our contemporary Earth. The spectacle wasn't limited to mammoths or saber-toothed cats alone. Across all continents, within every habitat shaped by persistent cold and relentless winds, there existed creatures that seemed almost mythological in their proportions and capabilities, serving as permanent reminders that this represented a far wilder planet than anything we recognize today. Throughout the expansive grasslands, mammoth herds marked only the beginning of an incredible biological pageant. Alongside these giants roamed woolly rhinoceroses, broad-shouldered creatures enveloped in dense fur coverings, their elongated horns projecting forward like natural spear weapons designed by evolution itself. These animals possessed sufficient power to successfully defend themselves against virtually any predator foolish enough to challenge them, yet they shared steppe territories with bison specimens that towered above human height, wild horses displaying thick, robust frames perfectly adapted for harsh conditions, and musk oxen specifically evolved to endure unrelenting cold that would kill most modern species. Moving towards southern regions where ice formations gradually yielded to open forest systems and temperate plains, different categories of giants established their dominion over these more hospitable territories. Mastodons wandered through woodland areas, systematically stripping bark from tree trunks using their long, flexible appendages. These creatures represented distant relatives of mammoths, somewhat smaller in overall dimensions, but no less impressive in their commanding presence and environmental impact. Ground sloths, achieving the dimensions of compact automobiles, lumbered throughout American territories, their massive claws designed for excavating roots from hard soil and tearing branches down from overhead, canopies that would otherwise remain beyond reach of smaller herbivores. Throughout these identical territories where massive, slow-moving plant eaters established their dominion, formidable predators maintained relentless pursuit of their prey. The short-faced bear, towering impressively above any contemporary bear species, stalked systematically across North American grassland territories with an imposing presence that commanded absolute respect from every creature sharing its habitat. These enormous predators possessed elongated limbs that propelled them at surprising velocities, creating deadly pursuit capabilities that would astonish any unfortunate animal that attracted their hunting attention. Meanwhile, in Australian territories, the natural world displayed equally bizarre and magnificent characteristics that challenged conventional understanding of biological possibilities. Gigantic kangaroo species equipped with incredibly powerful appendages shared continental spaces with marsupial lions, specialized predators possessing hunting adaptations completely unlike any creatures existing elsewhere on our planet. These unique Australian mega-predators represented evolutionary experiments that produced killing machines perfectly suited to their specific environmental conditions. Colossal flightless birds achieving greater mass than modern ostriches stalked through open countryside with predatory intent, while reptilian species far exceeding their contemporary descendants in sheer size lurked within river systems and swampland territories. These ancient reptiles maintained their armored body structures and bone-crushing jaw mechanisms virtually unchanged since prehistoric epochs, representing living connections to Earth's distant past. Even oceanic environments supported their own remarkable ice age phenomena and biological wonders. Along coastal regions where sea levels had dropped dramatically, newly exposed territories created fresh hunting grounds that benefited both early human populations and marine predators seeking expanded feeding opportunities. Massive marine mammals like the enormous Steller's sea cow, representing relatives of modern manatees, grazed peacefully on underwater kelp meadows that flourished in these altered oceanic conditions, while fearsome shark species continued prowling deeper water zones with the same predatory efficiency they had maintained for millions of years. Life during Ice Age periods wasn't confined exclusively to terrestrial environments. It represented a comprehensive global network of giants operating across every conceivable habitat. What transformed this ancient world into something truly extraordinary was the incredible population density these massive animals achieved throughout their territories. The Mammoth Steppe and surrounding ecological regions ranked among the most biologically productive ecosystems our planet has ever supported, sustaining enormous numbers of herbivorous species alongside the predators that depended upon them for survival. While food resources never achieved abundance by contemporary standards, the cold, arid conditions generated grassland systems that extended virtually uninterrupted across entire continents, creating limitless stages where enormous herds could roam freely, while their hunters maintained constant surveillance from strategic positions. Human communities existed among these magnificent creatures within delicate, precarious equilibrium that required constant vigilance and tactical awareness. Attempting to hunt mammoth or bison specimens represented ultimate risk-taking behavior, but the potential rewards proved too valuable to ignore completely. A single successful hunting expedition could provide sustenance for entire community groups, while supplying essential bone and hide materials necessary for tool manufacturing and shelter construction. Yet sharing territories with apex predators that could challenge humans for their kills or their very lives introduced constant danger that demanded sophisticated survival strategies. To maintain existence within this world, dominated by megafauna, humans evolved into careful observers whose survival depended as much on intelligence gathering as hunting prowess. They systematically studied behavioral patterns of every creature they encountered, learning intricate details that could mean survival or death. They observed how bison herds gathered defensively before major storms approached their territories. They memorized the traditional pathways mammoths followed when seeking optimal grazing locations during different seasons. They tracked predator movement patterns as dangerous hunters shadowed migrating herds with patient, methodical determination. Each fragment of accumulated knowledge could determine whether communities lived through another harsh winter or perished in the unforgiving cold that dominated their world. Despite its inherent dangers, this represented an environment of absolutely astonishing biological richness and diversity that modern ecosystems have never matched. Imagine positioning yourself on elevated terrain overlooking these Ice Age territories, with endless expanses of grassland and constant movement stretching toward distant horizons. Before your eyes unfolds an ocean of vegetation and animal activity. Mammoth groups pushing systematically through accumulated snow layers, bison herds creating enormous clouds of crystalline frost particles, wild horses stamping and snorting as frigid air streams from their nostrils. In remote distances, dark silhouettes of predatory species follow the grazing herds with unwavering patience and deadly intent, while overhead, vultures maintain circular flight patterns as their keen eyesight monitors the dramatic survival scenarios unfolding below. Throughout every visible area, the world pulses with vibrant life operating on scales that appear immense and completely untamed by any controlling force. However, this spectacular abundance existed within extremely fragile environmental conditions. The entire ecosystem remained held together by persistent cold temperatures, by the vast territorial reach of glacial formations, and by the steppe environments that surrounded these frozen barriers. As climatic conditions began shifting and ice accumulations started their inevitable retreat, this world dominated by giants would face unprecedented challenges and transformations. Advancing forests would systematically reclaim grassland territories that had supported massive herds for millennia. Swelling rivers would reshape continental geography and redraw territorial boundaries that had remained stable for thousands of years. The magnificent creatures that had ruled Ice Age environments would confront changes they possessed no evolutionary adaptations to overcome successfully. Before those catastrophic transformations arrived, however, this wilder version of Earth flourished with unprecedented biological diversity and productivity. Within this age dominated by mammoths, saber-toothed predators, and towering ground sloths, human populations refined their tool-making capabilities, sharpened their intellectual abilities, and strengthened their determination to survive against impossible odds. They didn't simply exist within the shadows cast by these giants, they learned invaluable lessons from observing their behaviors and adapting their own survival strategies accordingly. Soon, as massive ice formations began their extended retreat across continents, the complex relationships between humans and these enormous creatures would shift in fundamental ways that would permanently alter the trajectory of Ice Age civilization. The Ice Age didn't conclude through a single dramatic climatic event or sudden environmental catastrophe. It wasn't characterized by rapid temperature increases or overnight disappearance of glacial formations that had dominated continents for tens of thousands of years. Instead, the ending represented a prolonged, irregular retreat, a gradual dissolution of the frozen grip that had controlled global weather patterns and shaped continental geography across countless generations. Our planet shifted through barely perceptible increments, with each small change carrying cascading consequences that completely reshaped terrestrial features, oceanic systems, and the countless lives that had adapted their existence to depend upon stable Ice Age conditions. The transformation began with warming trends so subtle they might have escaped detection by casual observation. Summer seasons gradually extended their duration, while accumulated snows that had previously persisted well into annual cycles began melting more completely during warmer periods. The massive glaciers, those immense rivers of compressed ice, experienced these temperature differences first, as their edges softened and became increasingly unstable. Meltwater began trickling across glacial surfaces, creating channels that expanded wider and deeper with each successive season of warming. What had previously represented silent, motionless ice formations now began moving with entirely new urgency and potentially catastrophic force. These initial meltwater flows cut through established landscapes like precision instruments, carving entirely new geographical features. Glacial rivers erupted from beneath ice formations, transporting enormous quantities of silt and stone debris in their torrential currents, while systematically reshaping valley systems and creating completely new drainage channels that would persist for thousands of years. These dramatic climate reversals represented merely brief episodes when compared to the enormous temporal scale spanning the entire Ice Age epoch. However, for the human populations and animal communities experiencing these sudden environmental shifts firsthand, they served as stark reminders that Earth's massive climatic transformation was far from following any simple, predictable pattern. The planet's transition from frozen to temperate conditions involved complex feedback mechanisms and unexpected setbacks that could reverse decades of gradual warming within surprisingly short timeframes. One of the most spectacular and disruptive of these climatic reversals occurred during what modern researchers identify as the Younger Dryas period in Neutron, a sudden return to nearly full glacial conditions that struck approximately 12,000 years ago with devastating force. Just when the world appeared to be warming permanently and irreversibly, bitter cold conditions returned with shocking intensity, completely halting the gradual retreat of ice formations and plunging vast regions of our planet into one final, unexpected deep freeze that caught every living thing completely unprepared. For more than 1,000 consecutive years, the natural progression towards spring seasons was systematically delayed across enormous territories. Grassland ecosystems that had begun flourishing in newly temperate conditions withered and died under renewed Arctic assault. Survival once again became purely a matter of desperate endurance against impossible odds, forcing both human communities and animal populations to rapidly readjust their strategies for staying alive in conditions they thought had disappeared forever. Yet even this final powerful expression of Ice Age dominance eventually surrendered to the unstoppable forces of global warming. When frigid temperatures finally released their grip permanently, the massive glaciers retreated with unprecedented speed and violence. Ocean levels, fed continuously by meltwater from countless rivers swollen beyond recognition, began rising at alarming rates that transformed continental geography within relatively brief periods. Entire territories vanished permanently beneath advancing waves that showed no mercy for established communities or migration routes. Land bridges that had enabled humans and animals to traverse between continents for thousands of years were completely swallowed by expanding oceanic systems. The Beringia, that vast tundra expanse that had connected Asian and North American territories, slipped beneath the waters of the Bering Strait, eliminating forever the superhighway that had enabled some of humanity's most significant migrations. Doggerland, previously a rich hunting territory stretching between British and mainland European regions, was systematically drowned by the rising North Sea until no trace remained of the grasslands that had supported thriving communities for generations. As global temperatures continued increasing, forest ecosystems began their relentless northward expansion, systematically replacing the magnificent grasslands of the Mammoth Steppe with entirely different habitat types. Tree coverage spread rapidly across European, Asian, and North American territories, transforming open plains that had supported massive herds into shadowed woodland environments that favored completely different species assemblages. Many of the Ice Age giants, pleachers whose evolutionary adaptations were specifically engineered for worlds dominated by cold temperatures and limitless open spaces, discovered themselves increasingly constrained by these changing landscape conditions. Some species managed successful adaptations to new environmental realities, while many others failed completely and disappeared into extinction. For human populations, however, this massive transformation represented unprecedented opportunity rather than insurmountable challenge. As glacial formations retreated and climate patterns achieved greater stability, they uncovered territories enriched with flowing rivers, fertile soil deposits, and abundant natural resources that had been inaccessible for millennia. They followed the meltwater streams with systematic determination, established settlements near lakes and valleys carved by retreating ice, and initiated the lengthy process of transforming from nomadic hunting societies into something fundamentally different. The first permanent settlers of a rapidly warming world that offered possibilities their ancestors could never have imagined. Even as they adapted successfully to these new terrestrial conditions, the glacial legacy remained permanently carved into landscape features that would influence human development for thousands of years. Valleys created by ice movement became natural highways for river systems that connected distant territories, while deposits of silt and stone left behind by retreating glaciers provided the foundational materials for future agricultural developments. The glacial retreat marked not only the conclusion of an extended period dominated by cold temperatures, but simultaneously represented the beginning of the world that would eventually support complex civilizations. The Ice Age wasn't completely finished, but its overwhelming strength had been permanently broken. Those imposing walls of ice that had appeared eternal were finally fading from continental landscapes, and emerging in their place were entirely new geographical features that would define the modern world. The final great floods remained ahead in this transformation timeline, and with them would come the ultimate reshaping of planetary geography. As glacial formations weakened and global warming accelerated, the accumulated ice didn't simply vanish quietly into atmospheric moisture. Instead, it fought its way toward freedom through violent melting processes that occurred in unpredictable episodes, sometimes gradually and peacefully, other times through catastrophic bursts that released unimaginable quantities of water within extremely short time frames. Beneath and within the shrinking sheets of ice, water accumulated in enormous hidden reservoirs that remained contained only by walls of frozen mass that had maintained their positions for thousands of years. When those icy barriers finally failed under mounting pressure, the Earth itself seemed to emit thunderous roars that could be heard across vast distances. These weren't ordinary flooding events that might inconvenience local communities for brief periods. They represented torrents so monumentally immense that they completely rewrote continental geography within a matter of days, creating landscape features that remain visible today as permanent testaments to the incredible forces unleashed during glacial collapse. Throughout North America, one of the most spectacular examples of this phenomenon developed beneath the massive Laurentide ice sheet. As warming temperatures caused systematic melting, an enormous body of water known as glacial Lake Agassiz formed behind natural barriers, achieving dimensions larger than all contemporary Great Lakes combined into a single reservoir. For several centuries, this colossal lake remained trapped behind walls constructed from ice and accumulated sediment materials. However, ice formations are never permanent fixtures. They represent temporary geological features subject to eventual failure. When the barriers containing Lake Agassiz finally gave way under tremendous pressure, the lake exploded outward in a flood of such staggering magnitude that it would have challenged human comprehension even with modern understanding of hydraulic forces. Water surged across the landscape with absolutely unstoppable momentum, converting entire valley systems into temporary inland seas within hours of barrier failure. Rivers that had previously meandered peacefully through modest channels were instantly transformed into raging torrents extending for miles in width, carrying destructive power that obliterated everything in their paths. These floods transported massive boulders as effortlessly as small twigs, systematically grinding underlying earth formations and scouring deep channels directly into bedrock layers that had remained undisturbed for millions of years. The torrents poured relentlessly toward oceanic destinations, raising global sea levels measurably and permanently altering climate patterns through their massive injection of fresh water into established circulation systems. Each major flood event functioned like a powerful shock to planetary environmental systems, reshaping atmospheric wind patterns and redistributing thermal energy across global territories in ways that influenced weather conditions for decades afterward. This wasn't an isolated phenomenon limited to North American territories alone. These around the edges of melting glacial formations worldwide, other hidden lakes remained in position, waiting for their own inevitable moments of catastrophic release. Individual generations might establish entire lifetimes, alongside enormous lake systems whose opposite shores remained barely visible through atmospheric haze on clear days. Their children could discover those identical water bodies completely vanished, replaced by expansive grassland territories or entirely new river systems flowing through areas where no waterways had existed throughout recorded memory. Within the brief span encompassing human generational experience, the landscape itself remained vibrantly alive, transforming through processes that demanded continuous adaptation and flexibility from every community attempting to maintain stable settlements. These catastrophic floods and mysterious hidden lakes represented far more than simple conclusions to established patterns. They functioned as dramatic beginnings that would define the future character of our planet. These massive water releases systematically carried away the final physical remnants of the glacial world, while simultaneously carving out the distinctive geographical features that characterize our contemporary environment. They created the river-valley systems where future civilizations would eventually establish their greatest cities and cultural centers. They deposited fertile plains enriched with nutrient-dense sediments accumulated from a completely vanished geological epoch. Through their thunderous violence and their eventual peaceful silence, they marked the ultimate struggles of the Ice Age as it finally surrendered dominion to a warmer, more verdant Earth that would support entirely different forms of life. However, even as rushing waters systematically reshaped continental geography, another equally dramatic narrative was simultaneously unfolding across these transformed territories. This parallel story concerned the ultimate fate of the magnificent giants that had ruled the frozen world with unchallenged authority for countless millennia. The Ice Age was dissolving away through irreversible processes, and accompanying this climatic transformation, many of the creatures that had served as its most defining characteristics would soon follow their disappearing habitat into permanent extinction. As glacial formations continued their systematic retreat and global temperatures steadily increased, the colossal animals that had dominated Ice Age ecosystems confronted environmental challenges they possessed no evolutionary mechanisms to overcome successfully. Throughout tens of thousands of years, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloth species, and saber-toothed cats had maintained absolute dominion over their crystalline territories through adaptations perfectly suited for existence, built around bitter winds and limitless grassland expanses. Yet the Ice Age was reaching its inevitable conclusion, and with this climatic transformation, the fundamental environmental foundations supporting their survival began crumbling beneath them like unstable ice formations. The initial devastating impact originated from rapid climate changes that exceeded their adaptive capabilities. As massive ice sheets melted with accelerating speed, the mammoth steppe nike, that vast, arid grassland ecosystem that had sustained enormous grazing herds for millennia, began contracting toward increasingly smaller refuges. Advancing in its place, forest ecosystems crept steadily northward, their dense tree coverage systematically enclosing territories that had previously remained open and boundless for as far as any creature could travel. For animals whose entire evolutionary history had equipped them for plains existence, this emerging world represented a suffocating prison that trapped them within shrinking habitat fragments. The specialized grasses that had provided their primary nutritional sources disappeared beneath expanding canopies of deciduous leaves, replaced by plant species they were poorly equipped to digest or process effectively. Mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses could migrate only limited distances before dense forest barriers completely blocked their traditional movement patterns. Steppe bison and wild horse populations, previously capable of roaming freely across entire continents, discovered their territorial ranges systematically fragmented into isolated pockets that couldn't support viable breeding populations. The apex predators that had depended entirely upon these magnificent herds for survival, dire wolves, saber-toothed cats, and cave lions witnessed their food supplies steadily diminishing as prey. Animals became increasingly scarce and difficult to locate. Gradually, but inexorably, the intricate biological network that had sustained Ice Age life began systematically unraveling like a complex tapestry whose supporting threads were being cut one by one. However, climate transformation alone wasn't the exclusive force exerting pressure on these magnificent giants. Simultaneously, human populations were expanding into every accessible corner of their traditional territories, bringing with them technological capabilities that had been refined across thousands of years of continuous development. Armed with knowledge accumulated and transmitted through countless generations, hunting communities had evolved into formidable competitors capable of challenging even the largest prey species. A single coordinated group of experienced humans equipped with carefully crafted spear weapons could successfully bring down a fully grown mammoth through strategic planning and cooperative tactics. Activities that had once represented rare and extremely dangerous accomplishments became increasingly frequent occurrences, particularly as human populations expanded and hunting methodologies achieved greater sophistication through technological innovation and improved coordination techniques. Certain researchers maintain that hunting activities alone didn't cause the extinction of these giants, but rather the lethal combination of intensive hunting pressure combined with rapidly warming climate conditions created an impossible survival scenario. The magnificent animals were already experiencing severe stress from dramatically shrinking habitats and progressively dwindling food resources when human hunters arrived in significant numbers, pushing the delicate ecological balance beyond its critical breaking point. The archaeological evidence supporting this theory lies scattered throughout territories worldwide, providing concrete proof of this tragic convergence. Throughout Siberian regions, frozen mammoth carcasses remain buried within permafrost layers, some displaying wound patterns that could only have resulted from human-manufactured weapons designed specifically for penetrating thick hide and reaching vital organs. Across North American territories, mammoth kill sites reveal unmistakable signs of systematically organized hunts, with skeletal remains showing bones deliberately cracked open for marrow extraction and meat systematically stripped from carcasses with remarkable efficiency. These weren't isolated incidents representing occasional opportunistic encounters between humans and megafauna. Instead, they formed components of larger behavioral patterns that repeated consistently wherever expanding human populations encountered established megafauna communities. Yet even as numerous giant species disappeared permanently from their traditional ranges, some populations managed to maintain precarious survival in remote locations that remained temporarily inaccessible to human hunters. On a distant Arctic island known as Wrangel, a small mammoth population survived for thousands of years after their mainland relatives had vanished completely from continental territories. These isolated survivors gradually dwindled in overall body size, evolving into smaller, physically weaker versions of their magnificent ancestors as limited resources and genetic bottlenecks took their inevitable toll. Nevertheless, they persevered in this remote sanctuary, completely cut off from contact with the rest of the world by rising sea levels that eliminated all land bridge connections. Eventually, even these final survivors disappeared forever, but their extended survival represents a haunting echo of an irretrievably vanished epoch. The extinction process wasn't characterized by sudden simultaneous collapse across all territories. Instead, it occurred through successive waves of disappearance beginning in certain geographical regions, while giants continued thriving in others that retained more favorable conditions. Throughout Australian territories, many of the continent's great marsupial species had vanished completely long before Northern Hemisphere ice sheets had even begun their systematic melting processes. Throughout American continents, mammoths and saber-toothed predators maintained viable populations until the combination of warming world conditions and expanding human presence reached the critical tipping point that made continued survival impossible. By the time the Ice Age finally yielded completely to contemporary climate patterns, the great migrating herds had diminished to nothing, leaving behind only scattered bones and profound silence, where thunderous hoofbeats had once echoed across endless territories. These newly formed aquatic systems evolved into vital anchors supporting emerging biological communities, their shorelines decorated with the earliest green vegetation pioneering the reclamation of previously barren territories. The grasses that had once extended infinitely across mammoth steppe territories began systematically yielding space to advancing forest ecosystems that would fundamentally transform the planet's appearance. Birch and pine species arrived as the initial colonizers, remarkably hardy pioneer trees capable of establishing themselves in nutrient-poor soils while tolerating harsh climatic conditions that would have killed more sensitive species. Following these resilient forerunners came oak, elm, and numerous other deciduous trees, systematically spreading northward as atmospheric conditions achieved greater stability and temperature ranges became more predictable. Within several thousand years, territories that had previously existed as completely treeless expanses underwent total transformation into dense woodland environments. The infinite open horizons that had characterized Ice Age landscapes disappeared beneath continuous canopies of verdant foliage that blocked views and fundamentally altered the visual character of entire continents. Accompanying these forest expansions came entirely new animal communities specifically adapted for woodland environments. Deer populations moved confidently into these newly shaded territories, followed closely by wild boar and smaller grazing species that flourished among tree communities rather than open grasslands. Wolf populations, previously specialized hunters of massive herd animals, adapted their strategies for forest conditions, evolving into stealthier and more specialized predators capable of navigating dense vegetation while pursuing more elusive prey. Human societies also transformed dramatically alongside these changing landscapes, no longer following the enormous migrations of mammoth or bison herds across open territories. They developed techniques for hunting the more cunning creatures inhabiting woodland environments. They crafted sophisticated bow and arrow systems capable of striking accurately from concealed distances, while creating specialized tool assemblages designed specifically for forested conditions rather than open steppe environments. Rivers originating from melting ice formations transported essential nutrients throughout these territories, converting many regions into fertile corridors, supporting abundant biological diversity. Fish populations filled the flowing streams while bird species established nesting sites along water's edges, creating complex ecosystems centered around these waterways. Wetland environments formed within depressions left behind by retreating glacial formations, attracting explosive increases in wildlife populations. Where previous landscapes had been characterized by resource scarcity and survival challenges, there now existed remarkable abundance and opportunity. Even oceanic systems underwent significant transformation as glacial formations released their accumulated water reserves back into marine environments. Shorelines shifted dramatically inward as rising sea levels reclaimed previously exposed continental shelves. Coastal plains that had supported terrestrial communities for thousands of years vanished permanently beneath advancing waves. However, emerging in their place were new bay systems and estuarine environments teeming with marine life forms that had been absent during low sea level periods. Where oceanic systems met terrestrial boundaries, human populations discovered some of their most productive resource zones, harvesting shellfish and fish along coastlines, while adapting once again to rapidly changing environmental conditions. Yet this transformation extended beyond simple physical geography. It fundamentally reshaped the basic rhythms governing all biological existence. The Ice Age had represented a world dominated by environmental extremes, characterized by interminable winter seasons, interrupted by brief, frantic summer growing periods that demanded maximum efficiency from every living organism. As global climate patterns warmed and stabilized, seasonal cycles achieved more balanced proportions that supported different survival strategies. Spring seasons extended their duration significantly. Summer temperatures became more moderate rather than intensely brief, and winter conditions softened enough to permit year-round activity for many species. While the world remained challenging, its pace became gentler, and its opportunities considerably broader than anything possible during glacial conditions. This fundamental shift created possibilities for entirely unprecedented developments in human society. For the first time in their evolutionary history, human communities began establishing semi-permanent settlements for extended periods, rather than maintaining constant nomadic movement patterns. They developed techniques for gathering plant resources systematically, hunting smaller game animals within defined territories, and learning to interpret the cyclical patterns governing their changing environments. Gradually and experimentally, they initiated activities that would shape landscapes, rather than simply exploiting them. They cleared forest patches for specific purposes, scattered seeds in prepared soil areas, and established the foundational practices that would eventually lead to agricultural systems where humans would no longer depend exclusively on nature's random provisions, but would actively mold environmental conditions to meet their specific needs. This planetary rebirth represented far more than simply the conclusion of Ice Age conditions. It established the fundamental framework supporting the world we recognize today. The forest systems that spread throughout European and Asian territories, the grassland environments that persisted across North American regions, the expanding river networks and newly formed lake systems. All of these became the geographical backdrop supporting the eventual rise of complex human civilizations. From these verdant landscapes would emerge the first systematic farming operations, the earliest permanent village settlements, and ultimately the initial urban centers that would define human cultural development. Even within this increasingly green earth, however, unmistakable reminders of the Ice Age maintained their presence throughout the transformed environment. The massive lakes carved by glacial action continued dotting continental surfaces as permanent testimonies to ice sheet activity. Atmospheric currents still transported fine particles from locations where ice had systematically ground solid rock into powder across thousands of years. Throughout far northern territories, tundra and ice formations still maintained their grip along the edges of habitability, serving as pale echoes of the epoch that had recently passed. Our planet hadn't simply recovered from ice age conditions through some natural healing process. It had been completely remade through the transformative forces unleashed during that frozen era. Every valley system and river network, every fertile plain and forest ecosystem that spread in the wake of retreating glacial formations represented a permanent legacy inherited from that crystalline epoch. From the permanent scars left by advancing and retreating ice emerged a world perfectly prepared for unprecedented developments in biological complexity and human innovation. Humanity itself, no longer limited to existence as specialized hunters traversing open steppes, stood ready to take revolutionary steps forward into entirely new forms of social organization and environmental manipulation. Yet, even as verdant vegetation spread systematically across previously barren landscapes, the profound memory of Ice Age conditions never faded from the planetary record. The permanent marks left by that frozen era remained written deeply into stone formations and soil compositions, waiting patiently for future generations who would eventually develop the scientific knowledge necessary for interpreting these ancient messages. Even after the final massive glaciers completed their retreat and Earth achieved its current green appearance, the Ice Age never truly disappeared from our world. Its distinctive traces remain continuously present all around us, permanently etched into surface geography and concealed within deep geological layers, where patient observation can reveal their secrets. Every valley carved through glacial action, every massive boulder transported far from its original location, and every stratified band of sediment preserved within rock formations serves as quiet testimony to a world that once existed beneath endless skies dominated by snow and relentless winds. The most dramatic among these surviving traces are the distinctive landforms themselves, which continue bearing unmistakable signatures of glacial activity across vast regions. Throughout North American and European territories, U-shaped valleys display the characteristic evidence of ice sheet passage that cannot be mistaken for any other geological process. Unlike rivers, which create narrow channels following winding paths of least resistance, advancing ice formations scoured everything within their paths completely, leaving behind broad, deep valleys featuring sheer wall faces and remarkably flat bottom surfaces. These landscapes represent the permanent shadows cast by ancient ice sheets, neat, silent yet undeniable proof of their slow grinding power that reshaped entire continents. Through these crystalline archives preserved in polar ice, we've unlocked the secrets of how this frozen epoch originated, understanding its rhythmic breathing patterns that alternated between intense cold and relative warmth, and witnessing how it ultimately released its strangling grip on our planet. Within rock formations lying directly beneath our daily footsteps, additional evidence tells complementary chapters of this extraordinary story. Loess formations, enormous accumulations of wind-transported particles deposited during glacial periods, extend across Chinese territories, European regions, and North American landscapes in vast blankets that continue nourishing agricultural productivity thousands of years after their initial deposition. These layers of fine, pale sediment were systematically gathered by Ice Age atmospheric currents and distributed in thick coverings that still sustain the farmlands supporting modern civilization. Every successful harvest that emerges from these enriched soils represents a quiet tribute to the glacial formations that once methodically stripped continental surfaces completely bare before redistributing their mineral wealth across enormous distances. The agricultural abundance we depend upon today exists as a direct consequence of Ice Age processes that occurred long before human civilization emerged. Moreover, the actual skeletal remains of Ice Age creatures continue emerging from their ancient resting places, retrieved from frozen terrain and deep cavern systems where they've remained undisturbed for countless millennia. Perfectly preserved mammoth specimens, their original hair still clinging to hide, surface regularly from Siberian permafrost layers that have maintained constant sub-zero temperatures since their burial. Throughout North American territories, mastodon and giant ground sloth bones lie concealed beneath peat bog formations that accumulated over thousands of years. Across European regions, cave lion skulls and dire wolf remains rest within underground chambers that were once illuminated by fires maintained by early human inhabitants seeking shelter from brutal weather conditions. These discoveries represent far more than simple fossil specimens studied by paleontologists. They constitute direct physical connections linking us to an environment where bitter cold and desperate survival concerns influenced every aspect of existence for both humans and animals sharing those harsh territories. The narratives preserved within stone formations and ice deposits extend beyond mere historical curiosity. They serve as powerful reminders of how profoundly Ice Age processes shaped the contemporary world we inhabit. Without most people realizing this connection, the fertile agricultural soils supporting global food production, the river valley systems where major cities developed, the distinctive coastline configurations defining national boundaries, all of these fundamental geographical features were sculpted during that frozen era through processes operating on scales difficult for modern minds to comprehend. Even the current distribution patterns of plant and animal species across continental regions were established through the gradual advance and systematic retreat of glacial formations that created migration corridors, eliminated habitat barriers, and forced evolutionary adaptations that persist today. Walking through these landscapes in our contemporary world means standing directly within the footprint left by that vanished civilization of ice and survival. Whether you're a recreational hiker following the rim of a glacially carved valley, a farmer cultivating crops in the nutrient-rich sediment of ancient loess deposits, or a research scientist examining fragments of mammoth ivory, each person connects with identical historical processes. This represents a narrative written not through human language but through permanent modifications to stone, water, and preserved biological materials that speak across geological time. Yet these surviving traces function as more than silent testimonies to vanished conditions. They provide essential clues, individual pieces of an enormous puzzle that scientific communities continue assembling through careful research and analysis. Each valley system mapped with precision, every ice core sample extracted through drilling operations, and all fossil specimens recovered through excavation activities, deepens our understanding not only of Ice Age conditions, but of the fundamental forces that continue shaping planetary processes today. As we follow these subtle whispers preserved in stone and ice formations, we discover that historical events aren't truly gone. They remain actively present beneath our feet, concealed within landscapes we observe every day without recognizing their ancient origins. The Ice Age may have concluded thousands of years ago, but its distinctive fingerprints remain visible everywhere for those who understand how to interpret geological evidence. Every time we examine cartographic representations, every time we venture outdoors and observe valley configurations, river courses, or coastline profiles, we're witnessing the permanent legacy inherited from that frozen past. Our contemporary world isn't separate from Ice Age influences. It represents exactly what Ice Age processes left behind after their completion. The most obvious surviving echoes manifest themselves through distinctive land formations that bear unmistakable signatures of glacial activity. The Great Lakes, excavated through the grinding weight of massive ice sheets, continue holding approximately 1/5 of our planet's available freshwater reserves. The smooth hills characterizing New England and the plains dominating northern European territories remain covered in glacial sediments, their exceptional soil fertility derived directly from dust and pulverized rock materials deposited as ice formations retreated toward polar regions. Even the meandering pathways followed by numerous modern river systems were initially traced by torrential meltwater flows that poured from collapsing glaciers during the final phases of Ice Age conclusion. Throughout far northern territories, Ice Age conditions aren't merely historical phenomena, they maintain active presence in contemporary environments. The tundra regions of Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada remain frozen throughout most annual cycles, their permafrost layers continuing to preserve remains from a world that previously existed under completely different climatic conditions. Within that permanently frozen ground, mammoth bones continue emerging alongside traces of plant materials and even bacterial organisms that have remained dormant since the coldest periods of Pleistocene glaciation. Our atmospheric systems also bear permanent marks inherited from Ice Age processes. Carbon dioxide concentrations and Earth's climatic rhythms were fundamentally shaped through those frozen cycles that alternated between glacial and interglacial periods. Ocean current patterns and wind systems, the fundamental mechanisms that transport storm systems and precipitation across planetary surfaces, were influenced by how advancing glaciers sculpted continental configurations and redistributed the weight pressing upon Earth's crustal layers. Even today, our planet continues adjusting gradually from the immense burden imposed by ice formations that once compressed continental surfaces, with land areas rising millimeter by millimeter through slow rebound processes that began thousands of years ago and haven't yet reached completion. Ice Age legacy extends into the lives of animal populations as well. Bison herds still roaming North American plains represent descendants of massive populations that grazed alongside mammoth herds across ancient steppes. Muskoxen, maintaining their shaggy appearance and stubborn resilience, persist throughout Arctic tundra regions, essentially unchanged from their Ice Age ancestors who survived the harshest conditions Earth has produced. Reindeer and caribou populations that undertake annual migrations across northern territories follow pathways carved not only through genetic instinct, but through collective memory systems older than recorded human history, rooted deeply within the age dominated by ice and relentless winds. Even within human populations, these echoes persist with remarkable clarity. The migration patterns established by our ancestors were guided entirely by Ice Age world conditions that determined which routes remained passable and which territories could support human survival. Early humans crossed land bridges exposed by dramatically lowered sea levels, followed massive herds across mammoth steppe territories, and developed survival techniques for enduring cold temperatures that would prove fatal to unprepared individuals. The essential skills forged during that transformative period, Midas fire control, tool manufacturing, cooperative social organization, didn't disappear with melting ice formations. Instead, they evolved into fundamental foundations supporting everything that followed in human cultural development. The Ice Age transcends simple historical categorization. It represents far more than a completed chapter buried within our planet's distant past. Instead, it functions as the essential prologue that established every foundation supporting our contemporary existence. As we pivot from these haunting echoes toward the familiar world surrounding us today, we gain the perspective necessary to comprehend the complete magnificent sweep of that crystalline epoch, tracing its journey from those initial creeping tendrils of cold through to its final lingering traces that continue shaping our daily reality. Imagine possessing the extraordinary ability to walk backward through time itself, progressing step by methodical step beyond the forests and rivers characterizing our present landscape, advancing steadily into that frozen realm that once dominated our entire planet. The initial sensation that would capture your attention wouldn't be visual spectacle or overwhelming cold, but rather the profound quiet that permeated everything minus silence. So complete it seemed to possess weight and substance. Atmospheric currents would continue their eternal movement and crystalline precipitation would maintain its endless descent. Yet beneath these surface activities there would exist a deep, encompassing stillness that emerges only when time itself appears to expand beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. This wasn't the temporary quiet of a snowy morning, but the eternal silence of geological processes operating on scales that dwarf individual lifespans. Standing within that transformed world, you would witness horizons opening into seemingly infinite plains where the sky achieved dimensions that made the earth beneath appear almost insignificant by comparison. Your eyes would follow massive mammoth herds advancing slowly across steppe territories, their rhythmic breathing creating vapor clouds against pale atmospheric conditions that stretched endlessly in every direction without interruption. Throughout distant territories, bison congregations would graze in formations extending beyond visual limits, their movement patterns creating living rivers of life flowing across landscapes that appeared to continue forever. Far beyond even these magnificent herds, barely visible predatory shapes would maintain their patient surveillance, silent and methodical in their eternal dance of survival and death. The bitter cold would assault exposed skin with relentless intensity, yet the world itself would pulse with vitality in ways that contemporary environments struggle to match. Malix representing existence in its most raw, unfiltered magnificence operating on scales that challenge human understanding. You might pause along the edge of a massive glacier, its towering face rising like a frozen mountain constructed entirely from compressed ice, brilliant blue formations gleaming wherever solar radiation managed to strike crystalline surfaces. Meltwater would trace delicate pathways down its vertical expanse in thin streams, representing the humble beginnings of river systems that would eventually carve their channels across entire continental regions. The sound emerging from these processes would remain low and steady, serving as constant reminder that even the most imposing walls constructed from ice never achieve true permanence. They breathe through expansion and contraction, they shift under their own immense weight, and ultimately they surrender to forces greater than themselves. Turning away from these ice formations and venturing into inhabited territories, you would discover unmistakable evidence of human presence. Modest circles of shelters constructed ingeniously from mammoth bones and animal hides, wisps of smoke ascending from carefully maintained fires positioned at community centers. Fresh footprints pressed into snow surfaces would tell stories of recent activity, while tools arranged systematically for maintenance and sharpening would speak of constant preparation for survival challenges. Hunters returning from distant horizons would bear the permanent marks of wind and solar exposure etched into their weathered faces, their entire existence shaped by intimate relationship with this harsh yet magnificent environment. These resilient people would observe identical frozen territories not with wonder or curiosity, but with deep familiarity earned through generations of adaptation. For them, this represented neither distant past nor exotic adventure myth. It was simply home, the only world they had ever known or could imagine existing. Walking through this ancient environment would mean witnessing Earth, expressing one of its most honest, uncompromising forms. No urban centers, no constructed roadways, no artificial barriers, only the slow, patient work of natural forces, carving and shaping everything across time frames, measured in millennia, rather than human generations. The Ice Age never functioned as a frozen prison constraining life's potential. Instead, it operated as humanity's greatest teacher, nature's most ambitious sculptor, and in its own profound way, represented the true beginning of everything that would follow in human development and planetary evolution. Although that crystalline world has vanished from direct experience, its presence has never truly departed from our reality. It continues existing within valleys and lake systems carved by ancient glacial action, within soil compositions that nourish contemporary agricultural systems, within animal populations that still inhabit the coldest edges of our planet where Ice Age conditions persist. It lives actively within our collective human history, preserved in the fires our ancestors built for warmth and protection, embedded in the tools they manufactured and transported across endless snow-covered territories during migrations that established global population patterns still visible today. Standing outside during contemporary winter nights, when atmospheric conditions achieve razor sharpness and the world settles into profound stillness, you can almost perceive it directly, a memory that transcends individual experience, written permanently into stone formations beneath your feet, carried within wind patterns that connect present to past, whispered through the quiet weight of time itself accumulating across geological ages. The Ice Age represents far more than something we abandoned during humanity's forward progress. It constitutes the fundamental force that shaped the ground supporting our footsteps and determined the lives we're capable of living within contemporary environments. Its narrative remains written directly into the world's structure, and if you develop the patience to listen carefully enough, it maintains active presence, mained yet steady, like footprints preserved within ancient snow that refuse to melt completely. As we finally depart from this frozen realm and return to familiar contemporary surroundings, we carry essential elements with us that continue influencing every aspect of modern existence. Every glacier that advanced and retreated, every massive herd that thundered across steppes, every isolated camp established by our ancestors has contributed directly to this moment in human history. The Ice Age has concluded as an active climatic period, but its story remains permanently etched into planetary systems and into our own biological and cultural heritage. When you observe landscape features, river courses, hill formations, or quiet stretches of sky extending toward horizons, you're witnessing its enduring legacy made visible. When you experience the sharp bite of winter wind against exposed skin, you're establishing physical contact with something ancient and powerful. It's a subtle echo transmitted from a world where survival represented the only universal language and snowfall never truly ceased its endless descent from grey skies. We navigate our contemporary existence within a fundamentally different epoch, characterized by relative warmth and rapid change, Yet we remain profoundly shaped by the frozen age that preceded our current conditions. Perhaps through recognizing this connection, we can achieve better understanding of our position within the larger story, Nishnate, not as entities separate from geological history, but as its direct continuation and living expression. The Ice Age never achieves complete termination. It persists within stone formations, within flowing water systems, within collective memory, and within the profound quiet that emerges when we pause long enough to listen carefully. If you create sufficient stillness within yourself to receive these subtle communications, it remains actively present, waiting patiently to share its eternal wisdom with those ready to hear its ancient voice speaking across the vast distances of time.